Dad. Hey, how are you guys doing? The kids always looked forward to their weekly video calls with their dad, who was working in another country. I thought once his job overseas ended, we could finally be a happy family of 4 again. My name is Sarah. I got married to my husband, Adam, right after finishing college. We'd been dating since high school, and he was my first love. Our relationship felt like something out of a fairy tale. For the first 5 years of our marriage, everything was perfect. We had 2 wonderful boys, and Adam's career was going great. He had to move abroad for work, leaving me to raise our sons alone. It wasn't easy, but I managed with the help of my parents. That night, it was time for our weekly video call with Adam. The kids were so excited to talk to him. By the time the call started, my parents, the kids, and I were all gathered in front of the computer. It felt like a mini family event. I really wanted to have a private chat with Adam to talk about my struggles and future plans, things I didn't want the kids to hear. Hoping for some alone time, I set up the computer in the living room. Hey, how are you kids? Have you been behaving? Adam's face lit up with a big smile as the boys eagerly talked to him. He looked happy and healthy, just like always. The boys were bubbling with excitement, telling him everything about their week and asking when he would come home. My parents watched, smiling at the lively conversation. It felt like life was going smoothly and we were a happy family. After a while, the kids started getting sleepy, which worked out perfectly. With the time difference, it was late for them, but they had taken naps earlier so they could stay up for the call. Who's putting the kids to bed? You two can talk alone for a bit, my parents said as they took the boys upstairs. I was so grateful for their kindness. It meant a lot. Adam and I spent the next half hour talking about the kids and our future. Lucas swam 25 yards on his own the other day. He's been so excited about swimming lately, and Noah's been doing great in school. His teacher even praised him. I'm really proud of them, I told him. I've been thinking a lot lately, I added. Thanks to your job, we're doing well, but the boys are growing up so fast. I wish they could spend more time with you during these important years. I know it's not easy though. I get it, Adam said. But this project is really important for my career. Once it's done, things will be easier, and I'll have more time for all of you. Let's hang in there for the kids. He reassured me, and we kept chatting for a while. I told him funny stories about my friends and asked about his day, but soon I was too tired to keep going. My parents came back downstairs after putting the kids to bed, and they looked just as sleepy as I felt. I'm sorry, I'm so exhausted, I told Adam. I've got an early morning tomorrow, so I'm heading to bed. I thought I ended the call, but I was so sleepy that I only turned off the camera and speaker. The call was still connected, though I didn't realize it. To Adam, it must have looked like I'd hung up. Feeling content after spending some quality time with Adam, I said, thank you both for putting the kids to bed. Let's all get some rest too. Good night. As I was about to get up from my chair, I heard Adam's cheerful voice speaking to someone. All right, family call done. Hey, you can come over now. Wait, what? Was the call still on? It seemed like someone was coming to his place. Earlier, Adam had mentioned he needed to visit the project site for an inspection, so I assumed it might be a coworker. But his tone, so sweet and overly excited, made me uneasy. The sleepiness I felt earlier disappeared instantly. I told myself it was probably just a work colleague. Maybe I was worrying for no reason. Still, I decided to hit the record button on the screen, just in case. Adam left the room to take a shower, leaving the bed visible on the screen. My parents, who were still sitting nearby, looked uneasy too. He can't hear us now, can he? My mom asked in a hushed voice. No, the camera and microphone are off, I replied. My dad frowned and said it wasn't right to snoop. He reminded me that I should have ended the call properly. Just a little longer, until he leaves for work, I insisted. I just want to see how he gets ready. Reluctantly, my parents stayed with me as we watched the screen. About 15 minutes later, we'd heard the doorbell ring. Hold on, I'm coming, Adam's cheerful voice called out. I tried to convince myself there was nothing unusual about it. Taking a shower before work and having someone pick him up sounded normal. But something about his upbeat tone still felt off. We saw him come out of the bathroom, wearing a bathrobe, and walk across the bedroom. Oh no, this is bad, I thought. Maybe his clothes are in the bedroom, my mom suggested nervously. That's why he's in a bathrobe. Then we heard a woman's voice in the background. Moments later, a young woman, probably in her 20s, appeared on the screen. She walked into the room and wrapped her arm around Adam's waist. It felt like my whole world shattered in that instant. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "This is it, isn't it?" I whispered, my voice trembling as I stared at the screen with my parents. I wanted to say something stronger, but my throat felt tight, and nothing came out. "I'm going to confront him. I need to deal with this, or I'll never calm down," my dad said angrily. "For now, I'll stay quiet so we can record this as evidence, but I'll make sure he's held accountable." His fury was written all over his face. On the screen, there they were, the woman kissing and laughing with Adam. I felt like the biggest fool. How had I not seen this coming? "I wish we could go on another trip like last time. Do you still have extra money?" she asked, showing him pictures of their trip on her phone. "Don't worry, I've arranged for my paycheck stubs to be separated. Sarah doesn't know how much I make. Plus, I manage all the family savings, so she won't notice if I spend some," Adam replied casually. While I was at home raising our kids, he was off enjoying vacations with her. To make it worse, they'd gone to a place I'd mentioned over and over that I wanted to visit someday. Then they started doing the unthinkable. I felt sick to my stomach, but my parents and I sat there, staring blankly at the screen. "You don't need to watch this, but to bed now. It's not good for you," my dad said gently. "I'll have to see it later as evidence, so I might as well get through it now," I replied, trying to stay strong. After they were done, and just as the woman was getting ready to leave, I quietly turned off the computer. It was 3 a.m. We were all overwhelmed with emotions. My parents looked drained. "Let's go to bed for now," I said softly. We each went to our rooms, but I couldn't sleep. My body felt too heavy to move, and my mind was spinning. My heart was racing as if it might burst. I felt an intense mix of sadness, anger, and heartbreak. I kept wondering if it had all been a nightmare. Who was that woman? Why did this happen? The questions wouldn't stop coming. I tried to calm myself by focusing on my breathing. Eventually, morning arrived. "Mom, you don't look so good," Lucas said, looking worried. "Sorry, I was up late talking to your dad. I didn't get much sleep," I lied. "Nana and I will drop the kids off today," my dad said, stepping in for me. "Feel better, Mom. See you later." Their sweet and innocent words nearly brought me to tears. I held them back and smiled as I sent them off. I knew I needed rest. My mind was a mess, and I couldn't think clearly. After drinking some water, I went back to bed. Adam was supposed to come home in 2 months. I told myself I had to be ready before then to protect my kids and plan for what was coming. With that thought, I fell into a deep sleep. I must have been more tired than I realized because I slept until the kids came back. "Mom, wake up. Grandpa got us pizza for dinner. Come on," Lucas said, shaking me awake. I dragged myself to the dining room. "Are you feeling better, Mom?" Noah asked, his eyes full of concern. "Yes, I'm feeling much better now that I see you two. Did you have fun today?" I asked, tickling them as I tried to stay cheerful. "Stop it, that tickles," they giggled, their laughter filling the room. Seeing them happy seemed to ease my parents' worry as well. "You can't face a battle on an empty stomach," my dad said as he handed me a slice of pizza. As I ate, I began planning my next steps. First, I needed to figure out who the woman was. Then, I'd find an attorney and start working on the legal side of things, custody, alimony, and everything else. It felt overwhelming, but I knew this was the only way forward. I didn't want to spread rumors by talking to my friends. Thankfully, as a stay-at-home mom, I had time during the day. After dinner, I put the kids to bed and called my parents into the living room. About yesterday, there's no point in dwelling on it. If I didn't have the kids, I might have put it off. But thinking about them makes me focus. "I need your help," I said. Without hesitation, my dad replied, "Of course." "While you were sleeping, I called a lawyer I know. He helped one of my friends who was cheated on by his wife." He said it proudly. I was thankful, though I didn't think it was something to be proud of. I turned to my mom. "I'll help you however I can. I trusted Adam so much, but he betrayed us. I won't feel right if I don't do something about this," she said with determination. I wasn't sure what she was planning, but she seemed oddly calm about the situation. "I made an appointment with a lawyer for this weekend. Can you be there?" My dad asked. "Don't worry, I'll watch the kids," my mom said. The next day, we started working on a plan. We had 2 months before Adam came back. We wanted to settle everything before then. First, I checked all the social media platforms. It didn't take long to find out about his mistress. She worked at the same company as him and was a secretary at one of the overseas branches. I went to his company and explained everything to his boss, asking for help. At first, his boss was confused, but when I showed him the video of the affair, he put his hands on his head. "I'm so sorry. I'll talk to my supervisor and take the necessary steps," he promised. Next, I talked to the lawyer about filing for divorce, alimony, and all the legal steps. The video evidence of his infidelity was enough on its own, and I also had copies of bank statements and the mistress's contact information. "It's almost all set, so don't worry," the lawyer reassured me. Of course, I had to tell Adam's family. At first, they denied it, saying I was just making it up to get alimony. But once I showed them the video, they went quiet and apologized right away. "We're so sorry. We'll do everything we can to help you," they said. The hardest part was explaining everything to the kids. I honestly didn't know what to tell the kids. If I lied and said Adam couldn't come home for a while because of work, they'd grow up thinking he would eventually visit, and I didn't want to give them that hope. I made up my mind and told them, "Your dad lied to me in a very unforgivable way. I'm very hurt, and I can't live with him anymore. When he comes back, I know you'll miss him, but will you stay with me?" They didn't fully understand what was going on, but they said they wanted to be with me. I couldn't stop the tears. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." Then the day Adam came back arrived. I told him I had made a reservation at a restaurant to welcome him home with the family. I waited with my parents, his parents, and his boss. When Adam arrived, my father-in-law, holding back his anger, asked, "Is there anything you want to tell us?" "What's going on, boss? All of you. What is this?" he asked, confused by the situation. "There's no point in hiding it anymore. All I need is your signature." I slammed the divorce papers, the alimony charges, and a letter from his company on the table. He was stunned, frozen in place, while my in-laws began yelling at him. I told him to speak to my lawyer and left the restaurant with my parents. After that, his messages flooded in. "I want to start over with you. I was wrong. I love you with all my heart. Please forgive me." I told him to go through my lawyer and blocked him. He tried to get close by showing up in front of my house a few times, and he even tried to talk to my parents in a strange, friendly way. He reached out to mutual acquaintances to get to me, but I ignored him. When he showed up at my house, I called the police, and my parents completely shut him out. I told my friends everything and made sure people knew the truth. Left with no support, he became desperate. Later, I heard that when I called the police, he got out of control. He was charged with assault and battery and added to the National Criminal Database. At the court hearing, he asked to see the kids at least once a month. When I asked, "Does he really think he has the right to see them?" he went quiet. He did have the right to see them, but only if they asked, and I would be present during the visit for a limited time. Since his return, Adam had been having a rough time. He lost his family, was cut off by his parents, and eventually got laid off from his job. Now he was struggling to pay alimony while working part-time jobs. The salary Adam lied about and the savings he wasted ended up working against him, forcing him to cover a large portion of the alimony. He also broke up with his mistress. He couldn't afford child support, so his parents stepped in and paid it for him as a way of apologizing to their grandchildren. At first he saw the kids, but as they grew older and understood what happened, they started wanting to see him less and less. From the moment I found out about his affair to the day of the divorce, it all happened so quickly. It's almost funny to think about now. Honestly, I don't feel any sympathy or sadness for him anymore, no matter where he is or what he's going through. As for me, I invested the alimony money in stocks and was very successful. I managed to send my kids to college without any trouble. Now that they're independent, I bought a small house in the countryside and enjoy a peaceful life on my own. What I love most now is spending time with my adorable grandchildren. Although it's not as convenient as the city, with all its amenities, the countryside has lots of nature, fresh air, and a wonderful community. I don't have many reasons to visit the city, so I'm very happy here. I'm surrounded by a loving family. My sons bring their families to visit me during summer vacations. Every day, I remind myself that I'll never take this happiness for granted. Why did it have to be you? Mother's cold voice pierced the silence of the living room, her icy gaze fixed on my abdomen. I froze, speechless. My name is Moran, a 25-year-old housewife. My older sister Tara is 3 years my senior and has always been Mother's favorite. For years, I longed for Mother's approval. When I discovered I was pregnant, I dared to hope that news of her first grandchild might bridge the chasm between us. That day, my husband Warner and I visited my parents' house to share our announcement. Tara was the first to greet us, her bright smile as warm as ever. "Moran, it's been so long," she said, pulling me into a hug. Father was out at work, but Tara assured me he'd return soon. When Mother appeared, her expression tightened at the sight of me, though she quickly masked it with a smile as soon as she noticed Warner. "Oh my, I don't have anything prepared for your visit. Just a moment," she said, retreating to the kitchen. Minutes later, she returned with a plate of homemade cookies. They were laden with sugar, something she knew I disliked. "Ah, that's right. Moran doesn't like sweets, does she?" she said with exaggerated concern, her gaze shifting to Warner. "I'm sorry." Warner smiled politely and replied, "Who I'm eating with matters more than what I'm eating." Mother's response was curt. "I see." She sat down on the sofa, her gaze still guarded. With everyone seated, I took a deep breath. "We came here today because we have something important to share." My voice trembled slightly. Mother's sharp eyes bore into me, but I pressed on. "Actually, I'm pregnant." For a moment, the room was utterly silent. Then Tara broke it with a joyous cheer. "Moran, congratulations," she said, throwing her arms around me. But Mother's expression darkened. Warner excused himself to take a work call, and Tara headed to the kitchen to make tea. Left alone with Mother, the tension in the room became suffocating. Her mask slipped completely. "Why did it have to be you?" she spat, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. I opened my mouth to respond, but she cut me off. "The first grandchild should have been Tara's. Someone like you." Before I could process her words, she stood abruptly and kicked me hard in the stomach. The pain was searing, and I collapsed, a scream tearing from my throat. "Mother, stop." Tara's horrified cry came from the kitchen doorway. She ran to me as Warner burst back into the room, his face a mix of shock and fury. "Moran," he shouted, kneeling beside me as I curled into myself, trembling. Tara grabbed her phone and called an ambulance while Warner held me protectively. "What are you doing?" She bumped into the dresser, Mother said calmly, waving a dismissive hand. But Tara's voice cracked with anger. "Mom, I saw you. You kicked her in the stomach." As the sound of ambulance sirens grew louder, I drifted in and out of consciousness. Warner squeezed my hand, whispering, "It's okay. I'm here." Tara was sobbing as she restrained Mother, shouting, "What if something happens to the baby?" The paramedics arrived, their voices urgent and commanding. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, Mother's cold stare burned into me, a concentrated embodiment of the disdain she'd shown me my entire life. Tara rode with me in the ambulance, holding my hand tightly. "I'm so sorry," she said over and over, tears streaming down her face. I should have noticed before. Despite my pain, I felt a glimmer of gratitude for my sister. Her warmth and love had been a constant, even in the shadow of Mother's indifference. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, the glow of streetlights flickered across my vision. My mind drifted to memories of my childhood. When had Mother's treatment of Tara and me diverged so starkly? I couldn't pinpoint the moment, but I knew Mother, the town's former beauty queen, had always reveled in how Tara mirrored her looks. Every neighbor's compliment, "You're Patricia's daughter, aren't you?" seemed to make her glow with pride. I, however, with my features taking after Father, had always been her disappointment. Lying in the hospital bed later that night, I came to a decision. It was time to end this toxic relationship with Mother, for my sake and for my child's. I still vividly remember one Christmas morning when I was 8 and Tara was 11. The tree was adorned with shimmering lights, and beautifully wrapped presents were stacked beneath it. Tara opened her gift first, a trendy, brand-name dress. Mother beamed with pride. "It's perfect for Tara. She is my daughter, after all," she said, her voice dripping with affection. When my turn came, I eagerly tore the wrapping off my box. Inside, I found a pair of simple jeans and a t-shirt, likely purchased on sale at Walmart. "These suit you better, Moran," Mother remarked casually. My young self didn't know how to respond. I just nodded, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. It wasn't just about the clothes. Even at mealtimes, the differences were glaring. Mother would heap extra portions onto Tara's plate, urging her, "You can eat more, can't you?" and offering her homemade desserts. Meanwhile, she'd ration my servings, saying, "Moran, if you want to maintain that figure, that's enough, don't you think?" As we grew older, the gap between us widened. Tara blossomed into a popular, confident teenager and became captain of the cheerleading squad. Mother attended every one of her weekend games, snapping endless pictures with pride. I, on the other hand, joined the track team. Despite my strong performance and good times, Mother never once came to watch. "I'm busy," was her perpetual excuse. Father came occasionally, patting my head with a simple, "You did well." But he was preoccupied with work and seemed oblivious to the complexities of our family dynamic. In high school, I began to realize my situation wasn't normal. The turning point came during a conversation with my best friend, Serena. "Moran, your mother is just too cruel," she said one day. I blinked, startled. "What do you mean?" "She buys designer clothes for Tara, but," Serena hesitated, her voice trailing off. "My mom would never treat her kids differently like that." Her words opened my eyes. For the first time, I saw my family through a lens I had avoided, and the truth was painful. Yet Tara remained unaware of the disparity. She genuinely believed I preferred simpler clothes. "Moran, you have such a good figure. You look good in anything," Tara would often say with a smile. Sometimes she even offered to lend me her clothes, but they rarely fit. Mother's treatment worsened when no one else was around. Along with her, her words turned sharp and cutting. "To think I had to give birth to a child like you. Tara would have been enough. Why can't you be more like her?" Her accusations tore at my self-worth, but I learned to hold back my tears, knowing that showing pain only fueled her cruelty. My friends noticed the toll it took on me. On my 16th birthday, Serena and a few others threw me a surprise party. Mother gave me nothing that year, but the small makeup set my friends gifted me remains one of my most treasured possessions. It was around that time that I decided to leave home. I was determined to build a life of my own after high school. Mother's parting words were a sneer. "With just a high school diploma, you'll never amount to anything." But her scorn only steeled my resolve. Meanwhile, Tara went to college, with Mother proudly dipping into the family savings to cover her tuition. "It's worth it for Tara," she said, as if justifying the sacrifice. No such funds had ever been set aside for me. But strangely, the injustice made me stronger. I focused on maintaining excellent grades while working part-time at a local diner. With each paycheck, I built my savings and mapped out a plan for the future. Lying in my hospital bed now, those memories flood back to me like scenes from a movie. The steady beep of the monitor reminds me I'm safe. The doctor assured me my little one is unharmed. I'm no longer that helpless girl. I vowed that day, as I lay staring at the evening sky, that I would never treat my child the way Mother treated me. On my second morning in the hospital, Warner arrived early. When I asked, "Is work okay?" he smiled warmly and replied, "You're more important." I met Warner 3 years after graduating high school. Right after leaving home, Mother had sneered, "You'll be back soon enough." But I never returned. Tara, busy with her college life, seemed indifferent to my departure. Starting out was tough. I continued working at the diner while applying for clerical positions at major supermarket chains. Every time I mentioned my lack of a college degree, interviewers' faces clouded with doubt. I lost count of how many rejections I faced, more than 30. The turning point came during an interview for a customer service position at an IT company. The HR manager said, "We value your experience and motivation more than your education." Those words changed my life. I landed my first office job at a modest IT company where I met Warner, a systems engineer. Our first interaction was over a jammed printer. "You're always here early and staying late," Warner observed one day, his tone warm and curious. I answered honestly, "I want to learn as much as I can." For someone with just a high school diploma, this job is a rare opportunity. From that day on, Warner often stopped by my desk. We chatted over coffee during breaks and eventually began spending weekends together. As we grew closer, I found the courage to share my struggles. My fraught relationship with Mother, the favoritism toward Tara, and Father's quiet indifference. I feared opening up would drive him away, but Warner was different. "No one has the right to deny your worth," he said, holding me tightly. For the first time, I felt safe enough to let my tears fall freely. Warner proposed during the winter of my second year at the company. After the office Christmas party, we strolled through streets adorned with glowing lights. He suddenly knelt on one knee, offering a simple but heartfelt, "Will you marry me?" I said yes without hesitation. 2 years had passed since I'd left home when I returned to announce our engagement. Mother's reaction was predictably cold at first. "No decent man would marry a woman with just a high school education," she scoffed. But when she learned Warner was a systems engineer, her demeanor shifted dramatically. "Oh my, an engineer?" she exclaimed, her sudden warmth disingenuous. While her change in attitude made me uncomfortable, Warner handled her superficial behavior with grace, responding with calm sincerity. Tara, on the other hand, was genuinely thrilled. "Moran, I'm so happy for you," she said, embracing me with a bright smile and offering to help with the wedding preparations. Even father, typically distant, offered his rare approval, saying he's a good young man. Our wedding was small but heartfelt. Mother wore a smile for appearances but couldn't resist whispering in my ear at the reception, "I don't think this will last." Her words no longer had the power to hurt me. My new life was a revelation. Warner's parents welcomed me with open arms, treating me like their own daughter. My mother-in-law gently guided me through the early days of marriage. "Your cooking is delicious," she'd say, her praise genuine and kind. At work, I continued to thrive. My experience in customer service led to a new role training employees, proving that my high school diploma wasn't a limitation anymore. A year after we married, I discovered I was pregnant. Warner's joy was immediate. He leaped to his feet, exclaiming, "This is amazing," and eagerly shared the news with his parents. They were overjoyed, showering us with baby catalogs and advice. Despite their excitement, I hesitated to tell my own family. I knew Mother would find a way to ruin the moment. Yet, a small part of me held on to hope. Hope that this baby might bridge the divide between us. Warner encouraged me, "I'll go with you." We set a date and informed Tara beforehand. That day now feels like a nightmare. As I lied in his hospital bed, the faint fragrance from the bouquet Warner brought fills the room. His whispered words, "It's our turn now," resonate deeply. Despite everything, I know I have Warner, our baby, and a happiness no one can take from me. A knock at the door interrupts my thoughts. "Ma'am, it's time for rounds," the nurse says gently, pulling me back to reality. The choices ahead will be hard, but there's no turning back. The doctor's earlier words echo in my mind. There's a small fracture, but the fetus is unaffected. Relief washed over the room when he said it. Tara squeezed my hand and Warner nodded, his face solemn but calm. Our relief was short-lived. The door opened and Father entered, followed by Mother. "Moran," Father said, his voice tinged with distress. "Tara called us. Is it true?" Mother cut him off, her tone defensive. "What are you talking about? Moran just bumped into the dresser, that's all." Tara stood up, her voice trembling with anger. "That's enough, Mom. I saw it. I saw you kick Moran in the stomach." The color drained from Father's face. "It can't be." Before he could say more, another knock came. A social worker stood at the door. "May I speak with you?" Though her voice was calm, her presence radiated authority. Mother crumpled, tears streaming down her face. "I'm being made the villain. Everyone's ganging up on me," she wailed, but no one was moved by her performance. The social worker remained composed. "This is clearly a case of violence, especially concerning a pregnant victim. It will be treated as a serious matter." Her words froze Mother in her tracks. "I can report this to the police," the social worker added, "but if you'd like to discuss this as a family first." Tara's voice cut through the tension. "Moran, let's tell them everything now." I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said quietly. "There's no need to hide anymore." It was time to confront the years of mistreatment I had endured from Mother. The weight of 25 years pressed heavily on my chest, but I began speaking. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling. "I've been enduring this all along." Piece by piece, I laid it all out, the favoritism, the cruel words, the way Mother would shower Tara with affection while treating me like an afterthought, her demeanor shifting entirely when no one else was around. Moran, father's voice broke as he spoke, trembling with regret. Why didn't you tell me before? I couldn't. I wiped away the tears spilling down my cheeks. She always acted like a good mother in front of you and Tara. I thought no one would believe me. Tara, sitting nearby, covered her face with her hands. I'm so sorry, Moran, she sobbed. I never noticed. Before I could respond, Mother abruptly stood, her voice sharp and defensive. Is it my fault? She spat. She was ugly and useless. Tara was beautiful, talented, just like me. Her tirade was cut short by Father, whose voice, usually so soft, thundered through the room. Enough, he said firmly. You're unfit to be a mother. I won't let you hurt Moran anymore. The social worker present spoke up calmly. In this situation, I recommend a restraining order and counseling. Mother's face twisted in anger. Suddenly, she lunged toward my bed, screaming, You ungrateful child. After everything I did for you. But Warner and Father were quicker. They restrained her as nurses rushed in, restoring order to the chaos. That evening, Father made his decision clear. I'm filing for divorce, he announced, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. Moran, I'm so sorry. I should have seen this. The police began investigating and a restraining order was issued. Mother moved in with relatives but continued sending bitter messages. I'll never forgive you, one said. You ruined my life. Tara, however, became my greatest ally. She visited my hospital room daily, vowing to support me. This time, she said, her voice resolute, I'll be there for you. Warner's parents were equally loving. My mother-in-law brought homemade soup every visit, her warm words filling the gaps left by my own mother. You're a precious daughter, she said. On the day of my discharge, my doctor gently placed a hand on my belly. The baby is healthy, he'd assured me. They'll grow up strong. Warner pushed my wheelchair outside, with Tara and Father walking beside us. The soft spring sunlight bathed us, and for the first time, I felt the warmth of true family. Before helping me into the car, Father hugged me tightly. From now on, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Let's live as true parent and child. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. The long winter of my life was over. A new season had begun. In the delivery room, the doctor's voice echoed. Moran, one more push. With every ounce of strength, I bore down, the sound of Warner's steady encouragement in my ear. You've got this. Tara, crying softly, rubbed my back. Then, a strong, healthy cry filled the room. It's a girl, the nurse announced, holding up the tiny bundle. As the nurse handed her to me, I stared at her red face and tiny clenched fists, tears blurring my vision. Nikki, I whispered, the name Warner, and I had chosen. Father was the first to see her in the waiting room. Tears welled in his eyes as he said, She looks just like you did when you were born. 3 months have passed since that day. Mother's last contact was a voicemail filled with resentment. I'll never forgive you. You've taken everything from me. I later heard she moved out of state. Sometimes late at night, I think about her, not with anger, but with sadness. She's a woman who lost her way, who lost the ability to love. Moran, Tara's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I think Nikki's awake. It's feeding time. Tara brought Nikki to me. She moved into an apartment nearby and visits almost daily, her gentle smile a source of comfort. Nikki has your eyes, she said, gazing down at the baby. Nikki's brown eyes reflected mine, but her radiant smile was all Warner. Father recently retired early to spend time with Nikki. I want to watch my granddaughter grow up, he explained. Every weekend he visits, holding her for hours. One day, he spoke to me with uncharacteristic seriousness. Moran, he said, you've done so well. You've become a wonderful mother. His words were a balm for wounds I carried for decades. Parenting isn't easy. Sleepless nights, constant worries, and endless adjustments fill our days. But I'm surrounded by love. Tara is my rock, always offering help. Warner's parents treat Nikki like their own grandchild, knitting her clothes and showering her with love. I've started attending a support group for mothers with complicated family histories. Sharing my story has helped me heal. On Nikki's 6-month birthday, we held a small celebration. Father, Tara, Warner's parents, and close friends filled the room with laughter and warmth. As the setting sun bathed us in light, Warner leaned in and whispered, Are you happy? I smiled. Very. Looking at Nikki's peaceful face, I silently vowed to give her unconditional love, to shield her from the darkness I once endured. As if sensing my thoughts, Nikki reached out her tiny hand, her touch reassuring me. This is where our real story begins. The spring breeze outside swayed the trees gently, promising a bright future ahead.
The day I went to my future in-law's house for the first time to introduce myself as their future daughter-in-law, I was incredibly nervous. As soon as I stepped inside the entrance, I was greeted by my future sister-in-law, Melissa. At first, she was all smiles, saying, "Nice to meet you," with a sweet demeanor. However, the moment my future husband, Adam, left the room, her attitude shifted drastically. "You should just leave," she coldly spat, splashing water at me. I was so shocked by her behavior that I couldn't say a word. My future in-laws, who were right there, said nothing. All they managed was a weak, "Oh, well, let's not make a fuss." Feeling humiliated, I stood up to deal with my soaking wet clothes, completely lost. Just then, the front door opened, and Melissa's husband, Ken, arrived, slightly late. "Hi, nice to meet you." I introduced myself weakly, pretending nothing had happened, but Ken looked surprised. "Wait a minute." At that moment, Melissa's face turned pale, her demeanor shifted, and the entire atmosphere changed. "My name is Lisa, and I'm 30 years old. Adam and I were introduced by mutual friends, and now we live a quiet life together. Though we haven't been blessed with children, I feel happy every day." My journey with Adam began several years ago. After graduating from vocational school, I worked in housekeeping services. I've always loved cooking and cleaning, and I'm proud to have helped so many families through my work. For example, I regularly assisted busy working couples by cleaning and preparing dinner, providing them with a relaxing home environment when they returned. For families with small children, I tidied their living spaces, giving overwhelmed parents a chance to breathe. And for elderly individuals living alone, I helped with daily shopping and meal preparation, ensuring they could maintain a safe and comfortable lifestyle. Through these experiences, I found deep fulfillment in improving the quality of life for others. One family I'll never forget was the Thompsons. One day, I received a call from the company I worked for about a new assignment, a large, luxurious home owned by a wealthy couple. When I arrived, I was struck by the spacious yard and grand gate. However, parts of the house seemed neglected. "Hello, I'm Lisa. I'll be helping out from today," I greeted them. The husband, Mark Thompson, welcomed me warmly. "I'm Mark, and this is my wife, Amy. Thank you for coming. This house is far too big for us to handle on our own, so we're grateful for your help." Amy, though looking a bit tired, gave me a kind smile. I began by touring the house, deciding where to start. From the large living room windows, I noticed the garden. Though it needed care, it was home to beautiful flowers Amy had nurtured. "These flowers are lovely," I commented. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I've been taking care of them for years." I started cleaning, polishing windows, dusting furniture, and organizing their home. Mark and Amy often watched me work, occasionally chatting with me. "You're so skilled for someone so young. How did you get into this line of work?" Mark asked. "I've always loved cooking and cleaning since I was a child," I explained. "I wanted a career where I could help others." Mark nodded in approval, looking pleased. Over time, we grew closer. Between tasks, we would sit for tea and share stories. One day, Amy showed me their family photo album. "What a lovely family. Is this your son?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "He works for a big company and travels all over the world, so he doesn't come home often. Right now, I think he's in, well, I forget which country." Though they spoke proudly of their son's success, a hint of sadness lingered. "It sounds like you're very proud of him." "We are," Mark said, "but we miss him a lot. When he comes home, it's the highlight of our year." Their longing for their son touched me deeply. I found myself wishing for his return, too. One day, Mark asked for a special favor. "Lisa, could you help me with something? Today is Amy's birthday." Honored, I prepared a special meal for her 77th birthday, complete with her favorite Japanese dishes and a homemade cake. When I served it, Amy's eyes welled with tears. "This is the most wonderful birthday I've had in years. Thank you so much, Lisa," she said, her words deeply moving me. But time is relentless. One day, when I arrived at the Thompson house, I noticed a black ribbon on the front door. A terrible sense of dread washed over me as Amy greeted me with red, tear-streaked eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't contact you, Lisa, but Mark passed away yesterday," she said, her voice breaking. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Mark, who always greeted me with a warm smile, was gone. A painful tightness gripped my chest. From that day on, Amy's demeanor changed. She stopped tending to her beloved garden, and the once vibrant flowers began to wither. She would sit on the sofa, staring blankly, lost in grief. I tried everything to cheer her up, but the void in her heart remained. Even the meals I prepared would go untouched. "Lisa, I think it's time for me to prepare for my own departure," she said one day, her voice heavy with sorrow. Hearing her words, I couldn't hold back my tears. Every day, I searched for ways to lift her spirits. I took her on walks around the neighborhood, and with her son's permission, I even arranged small day trips for Amy to help lift her spirits. "Ever since you started visiting, my days have been so much brighter," she said one afternoon, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't feel as lonely anymore. Thank you so much." Her words meant more to me than I could ever express. Just hearing her say thank you made everything worth it. However, only a few days after she shared those heartfelt words, Amy quietly passed away. For a while, I couldn't process the loss. The house, once filled with life and warmth, now felt vast and empty. Without Amy, it was as if all the color had drained away. I buried myself in work, using it as a way to numb the pain. My friends noticed the change in me, especially Emma, my close friend. "Lisa," she said one day, gently but firmly, "there's someone I really think you should meet. He's a great guy, just give it a try." After Amy's death, I hadn't been able to fill the hole in my heart. I went through the motions at work, but my passion was gone. Seeing me like this, Emma invited me to a dinner gathering. That night, for the first time in a long while, I dressed up a little and tried to push through my lingering sadness. When I walked into the restaurant, I saw Emma waving at me from across the room. Sitting next to her was a man I had never met before. "Lisa, come meet Adam," Emma said with a wide smile. "He's a really kind guy, and I think you two will get along great." Adam greeted me with a warm, gentle smile. As the night progressed, my nerves began to settle. During dinner, we talked about our work, hobbies, and families. Eventually, I shared my story about Amy. Before I realized it, I was crying. "I'm so sorry for bringing this up," I said, embarrassed. "It's okay," Adam replied, his voice soft and comforting. "Losing someone important is really hard." His warmth and understanding were like a balm to my soul. In that moment, I felt a weight lift off my heart. Adam listened quietly, his steady presence giving me a sense of comfort I hadn't realized I needed. After that night, Adam and I stayed in touch. We began meeting up regularly, grabbing meals, talking during breaks in our schedules, and simply enjoying each other's company. Spending time with Adam gradually filled the void in my heart. One evening, as we sat together at a quiet cafe, I found myself saying, "Adam, I feel so at peace when I'm with you. I want to be with you forever." Adam looked a little surprised, but then smiled gently. "I feel the same way, Lisa. You make my heart feel at ease. I want us to keep sharing these calm, peaceful days together." Tears filled my eyes, but this time, they were tears of joy. Being with Adam helped me rediscover my smile and my hope for the future. I felt certain that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, I could overcome them with Adam by my side. From that moment on, our days together felt like a dream. Each moment spent with Adam became a treasure. A few years later, we decided to get married. When the day finally came to meet Adam's parents, I was nervous. As we approached their front door, my hands trembled, but Adam gently squeezed my hand. "It's okay, Lisa," he said reassuringly. "My family is really nice." At the entrance, Adam's parents, Ryan and Sarah, greeted us warmly. "Nice to meet you. I'm Lisa," I said, trying to sound confident. "Thank you for having me today." "Hello, welcome. Please come in, we've been looking forward to meeting you," Sarah replied with a smile. "Make yourself at home." The atmosphere was friendly and inviting as they guided us into the living room. Sitting there was Adam's older sister, Melissa. Melissa greeted me with a dazzling smile. She was strikingly beautiful, with long, shiny black hair that gleamed in the sunlight and big, expressive eyes. Her cheerful personality instantly lit up the room. "Hi, I'm Melissa, Adam's sister. Thank you for coming today," she said warmly. "It's an honor to be here," I replied with a smile. At first, Melissa's friendliness put me at ease. We chatted easily about how Adam and I met, and the conversation flowed naturally. "So, how did you and Adam meet?" she asked. "We met through mutual friends," I explained. "From the first time I met him, I was drawn to his kind nature." "Oh, that's lovely to hear. Adam has always been such a kind soul. Ever since he was a child, He's still that way, so gentle and caring, Melissa said with a smile. Listening to stories about Adam's childhood made me happy. It was clear he had grown up surrounded by love and warmth. The evening felt perfect, until Adam stepped out of the room. "I'll be right back," he said, leaving to use the restroom. The moment he was gone, Melissa's expression changed, her eyes turned cold, and her friendly smile disappeared. "Why would he be with someone like you?" she sneered. "You're just a maid, after all." I froze, unsure of how to respond. "You don't belong in this family," she continued, her words cutting like knives. "Anyone can do housework. You're just a laborer, nothing more." Her gaze swept over my outfit, and she scoffed. "And that outfit? It looks like something out of the 80s. How embarrassing to stand next to Adam looking like that." Tears stung my eyes, but I couldn't find the words to defend myself. "This is exactly why you'll never be more than just a maid," she said cruelly. Then, without warning, she grabbed a glass of water and threw it at me. The cold water splashed across my face and clothes, soaking me instantly. I gasped, the shock leaving me frozen in place. "Oh no, the floor is wet now," she said mockingly. "Why don't you go clean it up? After all, that's your job, isn't it?" Her mocking laughter echoed through the room. Adam's parents sat silently, their awkward attempts at diffusing the situation amounting to a week. Now, let's not make a fuss." When Adam returned, he immediately noticed the wet floor. "What happened here?" he asked, concerned. I forced a smile, trying to hide my tears. "Oh, it's nothing. I just had a little accident," I said, excusing myself to the kitchen to calm down. As I wiped my face, Adam appeared behind me. "Lisa, are you okay?" he asked softly. "Lisa, what happened?" Adam's voice was filled with concern as he stepped into the kitchen and saw my wet clothes. He grabbed a towel and gently began to dry my hair. Tears welled up in my eyes as I hesitated before answering. "It was Melissa. She threw water on me and she said I'm just a maid. She told me to clean up the mess." Adam's expression darkened immediately. Without hesitation, he strode back into the living room, his voice sharp and filled with anger. "Melissa, what did you do? Why would you treat Lisa like that?" Melissa crossed her arms, feigning innocence. "What? I was just asking her to do her job. Isn't she a housekeeper?" Adam's parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but didn't say a word. They avoided his gaze, their silence a tacit acceptance of Melissa's behavior. "Melissa, that's enough." Adam's voice rose, his frustration evident. "Lisa is not just a maid, she's my partner, and you owe her an apology." Melissa rolled her eyes, her tone dismissive. "Oh, come on, Adam, you're overreacting. Lisa needs to get used to our family dynamics." I stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. I couldn't understand why Adam's parents didn't step in to stop Melissa. That's when I realized Melissa had always been coddled. She was the special child, born prematurely, often sick as a child, and never held accountable for her actions. Their overprotectiveness had turned her into someone who believed she could do no wrong. The door suddenly opened, and a man's footsteps echoed in the hallway. A tall, well-dressed man entered the living room. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his deep voice carrying through the tension. "I just got back from my trip." Melissa's face lit up, her demeanor changing instantly. "Ken, you're home." The man, who I quickly realized was Melissa's husband, smiled warmly. "Hi, everyone, I'm Ken." Then his gaze shifted to me, and his smile faded into one of recognition. "Wait, are you Lisa?" I nodded, confused. "Yes, I'm Lisa. Nice to meet you." Ken's face brightened. "I can't believe it. My parents used to talk about you all the time. You helped my mom so much after my dad passed. She always said you were like family to her." Tears sprang to my eyes at his kind words. "I'm glad I could be there for her." Ken turned to Melissa, his expression now serious. "Melissa, what's going on? Why is Lisa soaking wet?" Melissa's face went pale. She stammered, I didn't mean to." Ken's gaze hardened. "You didn't mean to? Melissa, this is unacceptable. Lisa was a blessing to my family. She deserves respect, not whatever this is." I'm sorry," Melissa muttered, her voice shaky. "That's not good enough," Ken snapped. "You need to take responsibility for your actions. This behavior isn't okay." Melissa burst into tears. "I don't know why I acted that way," she admitted. I felt jealous. Lisa's worked so hard for everything she has, and I've always been taken care of. I felt useless and small compared to her, and I lashed out. "I'm sorry, Lisa." Her confession left the room in stunned silence. For the first time, Melissa's vulnerability shone through her polished exterior. Melissa, I said softly, thank you for apologizing. I hope this is the start of something better for you. Ken let out a sigh. Melissa, none of that excuses what you did, but I'm glad you're starting to see things clearly. You need to make real changes. Melissa nodded, wiping her tears. I will, I promise. The atmosphere was heavy as Adam gently took my hand. Let's go, Lisa, we've had enough for today. As we left, Adam squeezed my hand tightly. I'm so sorry, Lisa, I never thought Melissa would act like that. It's okay, Adam, she has her own struggles to deal with. I just hope she grows from this. The drive home was quiet but comforting. We knew we would face any challenges together, no matter what. In the months that followed, Melissa's life took an unexpected turn. Her marriage to Ken unraveled as trust between them broke completely. They eventually decided to separate. Without Ken or her parents' constant support, Melissa faced the harsh reality of living on her own for the first time. She struggled but slowly began to grow. She got a job, learned to manage her finances, and discovered the strength she never knew she had. One day, months later, I ran into Melissa at a coffee shop. She looked different, still confident, but with a newfound humility. Lisa, she said softly, it's been a while. It has. How are you? She hesitated. I'm doing better. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, and I want to say I'm truly sorry. I was wrong to treat you that way. Her sincerity surprised me. I can see you're working on yourself, Melissa, that's what matters. Melissa smiled, a small, genuine smile. Thank you. As for Ken, he moved on, focusing on his career and personal growth. Meanwhile, Adam and I continued building our life together. Despite everything, our bond only grew stronger. I'm proud of you, Lisa, Adam said one evening. Why? Because you stayed true to yourself. You're the strongest person I know. His words filled my heart with warmth. No matter what challenges came our way, I knew we could face them together, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. Today, we say our final goodbye to Ryan, my beloved son who passed away. My heart aches even more because my husband, Mike, didn't even show up to his funeral. Frustrated and heartbroken, I decided to call him. His voice on the other end of the line was cheerful, a sharp contrast to my grief. I'm in Hawaii for my parents' 70th anniversary, he said, oblivious to the pain in my voice. When I told my mother, she was initially stunned, but her shock quickly turned into anger. What, they're in Hawaii? She exclaimed, her face reddening. Without hesitation, she resolved to confront Mike and his parents. I'm Emily, a 40-year-old office worker. Mike and I have been married for 10 years and share one child, our son, Ryan. For the past 2 years, Ryan has been fighting leukemia, a battle that has kept him hospitalized. Despite missing most of his early school days, his classmates would visit him, their presence bringing him joy. Ryan's resilience inspired us all, and his determination gave me strength. My parents were always there for Ryan, visiting him daily. My mom would often say how she looked forward to the day when Ryan could enjoy his favorite foods again. My dad, though diagnosed with dementia a few years ago, also made frequent visits. One day, mistaking me for a nurse, he said, "Thank you for taking care of my grandson." His words were bittersweet, though his memory of me faltered. His concern for Ryan remained unwavering. Ryan, wise beyond his years, understood his grandpa's condition and would kindly play along whenever my dad said something odd. Their bond was heartwarming, a sharp contrast to Ryan's relationship with his father. "Can't you visit Ryan sometimes? Don't you care about what he's going through?" I once asked Mike, desperate for his support. His response crushed me. "Ryan doesn't like me, so it's better if I stay away. Besides, I'm really busy." It was true that Ryan and Mike didn't get along. Mike had never been involved in Ryan's care, not even when he was a baby. Ryan, understandably, grew distant from his father. Whenever Mike had free time, he chose to spend it with his own parents, who also showed little interest in their grandson's health. "How can he be so heartless?" my mom said, her frustration evident. "And his parents, do they not care about Ryan at all?" I replied, half jokingly, "Maybe I married the wrong person." I had fallen for Mike's kindness when we were dating, but he had become cold and indifferent to both me and Ryan. "If I'd known he was like this, I would never have introduced him to you," my mom said, regret coloring her voice. Mike and I had met through my uncle, who was friends with Mike's father. At the time, I wasn't seeing anyone, so I agreed to meet Mike. He seemed kind, and we hit it off. Before I knew it, we were dating seriously and eventually got married. But things changed after the wedding. Mike's parents, who had been warm and welcoming before, became controlling. My mother-in-law, who once greeted me with smiles, turned harsh. You're part of this family now, Emily, and you'll do as I say. If not, we'll ensure you get a proper divorce, she once told me coldly. As I sit here now, grieving for Ryan, I can't help but wonder if I made a mistake trusting Mike and his family. I initially thought my father-in-law was a quiet man, but over time, his true colors began to show. He often made insulting remarks, saying things like, "We only let you marry Mike because the head of our family introduced you. Otherwise, there's no way we would have let someone like you marry our son." At first, I didn't understand his disdain. My uncle, who runs a real estate company, had introduced me to Mike. Apparently, during the introduction, my uncle mentioned that I came from a wealthy family. This led my father-in-law to assume that my father owned substantial properties. That assumption fueled his condescending attitude. I hadn't heard any of this from my father or uncle, so I initially believed my father-in-law's comments. After Mike and I got married, we moved into the house where my maternal grandparents had lived. They had passed away, and the house had been empty for some time. My parents planned to rent it out to prevent it from deteriorating, but when Mike found out about the house, he pleaded with my parents. "I promise we'll take good care of it, so please let us live there," he said. "It's close to her family, too, so we can help look after them." The arrangement made sense. The house was near both our families, which would allow us to keep an eye on our parents. However, having Mike's parents so close quickly became a burden. Mike would often invite his parents over and start bragging, saying things like, "Our house is so new, you must be jealous. It's so much bigger, maybe even twice the size of yours." While his father seemed irritated by the bragging, his mother would smile and say, "We could live here together. It might be old, but it's better than our place." After one such visit, I asked Mike directly, "Are you planning to have your parents move in with us? This isn't even your house." He laughed it off, claiming it was just a joke, but his mother's behavior suggested otherwise. Not long after, his parents began visiting frequently, inspecting the house as if they were preparing to move in. "Living here would be better than our poor house," my father-in-law muttered one day. "At least there's no rent in this dump." I was fuming when he called the house a dump, but my mother-in-law's actions were even worse. She ignored me completely while picking out a room for herself. When Mike didn't speak up, I decided to set the record straight. "We're borrowing this house from my parents. My grandparents used to live here, so of course, it's a bit old," I explained. My in-laws looked surprised, but my father-in-law quickly retorted, "That's why it's in such poor condition." His tone was dismissive, and I thought the house was far better than where they lived. My mother-in-law, however, accused me of lying. "I trust my son more than you," she said. Her disbelief didn't change the facts, so I let the matter drop. Still, I was uneasy, worried they might push their way into moving in. That fear subsided when I discovered I was pregnant. The talk of them moving in abruptly stopped. Perhaps they realized that living with us would mean helping care for the baby. One day, I overheard my mother-in-law say, "Emily's parents should take care of the baby since they live nearby." "I'm not doing it." I hadn't even asked for her help, but her comment stung. It was hard to fathom how she could be so indifferent about her first grandchild. When I told my mom about it, she just laughed. "Leave the babysitting to me," she said. "You don't need to ask someone who doesn't want to care for a sweet grandchild." She was right, and I decided to rely on my parents once the baby was born. When my son was born, my parents were overjoyed, but my in-laws only visited once. Even Mike's reaction was underwhelming. He didn't seem moved by the birth of our son, which was deeply disappointing. "Don't worry," my mom said, trying to reassure me. "Once the baby grows a little, Mike will feel more like a father." But as time went on, Mike showed no interest in our child. When our son turned 5, he fell ill. After several tests, the doctors diagnosed him with pediatric cancer. I was devastated, expecting Mike to support me through this unimaginable ordeal. Instead, he coldly said, "You'll have to cover the medical expenses yourself." "It's not my problem." His words broke me, leaving me to shoulder the weight of our son's illness and medical care alone. I was furious at my husband's attitude as a father. His lack of empathy was infuriating, but his mother's words cut even deeper. "It's because Emily passed on her genes that Ryan has cancer. None of our relatives have anything like that, so it must be her fault," she sneered. Hearing this, my father immediately stood up for me. "Don't you care about Ryan? We'll take care of him ourselves." You can do whatever you want, he said, his voice firm and protective. My father's support forced my husband and in-laws to leave quietly. Even though I was already overwhelmed by my son's illness, their cruel remarks made everything harder. My mother, however, encouraged me. Don't be discouraged. Ryan needs you to stay strong. We'll do everything we can to support you, she assured me. Bolstered by her words, I resolved to focus entirely on my son and not rely on my husband any longer. With my parents' help, I juggled work and Ryan's care. They were retired and dedicated themselves to supporting me, something for which I was endlessly grateful. Despite his diagnosis, Ryan's condition initially improved, and he managed to live almost like any other child. However, my husband doubted the seriousness of Ryan's illness. Is Ryan really sick, or are you just trying to fool me? He questioned one day, watching Ryan play happily. I ignored his baseless accusations. Arguing with him felt pointless. Over time, my husband spent less and less time at home, retreating to his parents' house. Oddly, his absence made things easier for me, as he brought nothing but complaints. My parents stepped in to fill the gap, taking turns helping me care for Ryan. Meanwhile, my husband seemed increasingly uninterested in our son's life. He only returned to the house more frequently after Ryan was hospitalized 2 years ago. Leave the housework to me, he'd say casually. Then, with a smirk, he'd add, by the way, why don't you just give me this house? I ignored his remarks, but it was clear his concern was less about Ryan and more about the property. His plans to move in with his parents loomed over me like a dark cloud. During this time, my father was diagnosed with dementia, and my mother and I were constantly busy managing his care. My husband and in-laws remained oblivious to my father's condition. Even when my father occasionally visited, they seemed unaware. One day, my husband said offhandedly, "Your parents were here earlier. They were just wandering around. Are they not going to help with Ryan?" His relaxed tone infuriated me, but I let it go, too exhausted to explain. As my father's dementia progressed, my uncle began visiting more often. He and my mother frequently held serious discussions. When I asked about it, my mother only gave vague responses. I was worried, but before I could dwell on it, Ryan's condition worsened. Despite preparing myself for this moment, the reality was overwhelming. With my husband unreliable and my father's health declining, I leaned heavily on my mother for support. When I updated my husband about Ryan's deteriorating condition, his response shocked me. "I'm busy right now. Stop calling me. You handle Ryan's situation," he said, dismissively. His lack of parental responsibility pushed me to the brink. I began seriously considering separating from him. Not long after, Ryan passed away. The grief was unbearable. I couldn't bring myself to handle any of the arrangements, but my mother and uncle stepped in, ensuring I could remain by Ryan's side until the very end. Just before the funeral, my uncle began to panic. "Where are Mike and his parents? They can't skip the funeral, can they?" he said, his voice rising in frustration. Seeing his concern, I called my husband. "Where are you?" "It's time to say goodbye to Ryan," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm at a party celebrating my parents' anniversary." "I told you not to call me right now," he replied cheerfully. Hearing his voice, my mother's face turned red with anger. "He's in Hawaii," she exclaimed. My uncle, visibly furious, sprang into action. While I hadn't expected much from my husband, knowing he chose a vacation over our son's funeral filled me with rage. "You knew Ryan was in critical condition and still went on a trip?" I said, my voice shaking. "I pity Ryan for having a father like you." I hung up, tears streaming down my face, as my mother comforted me. "I will never forgive them." "Don't worry, everything will be gone by the time they return from Hawaii," she said cryptically. Though her words confused me, I didn't have the energy to question them. Thanks to my mother and uncle's support, the funeral went smoothly. Afterward, however, I felt lost. My entire life had revolved around Ryan, and now I didn't know how to move forward. "Leave the future to me, Emily. Go back to your parents' house and take it easy," my uncle advised. Taking his advice, I returned home and helped care for my father while taking time off from work. My workplace was understanding and granted me an extended break, which was a relief. Then, one day, my husband called. "Emily, I can't get into the house." "Did you change the locks?" "Changing them without notice is awful," he said, sounding panicked. "I didn't change the locks," I replied calmly. "But I'm planning to end things with you, so don't call me anymore." I hung up, but moments later, he called again, this time more frantic. "My parents' house has been demolished. There's a land for sale sign up." "What's going on?" he shouted. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, cutting him off. "Check with my uncle." When I checked with my uncle, he seemed pleased and invited me to visit my in-laws' family home to see what was happening. Curious and apprehensive, I went as instructed. When I arrived, I found my husband and his parents standing outside, looking utterly stunned. "What's the meaning of this?" my father-in-law demanded. "Our house is gone. Is this because we didn't take you to Hawaii? Did you demolish the house out of spite?" The accusation left me baffled. I could never do something like that. "I was busy grieving my son and arranging his funeral," I retorted, frustrated by the absurdity of her claim. Just then, my uncle and mother arrived. My mother's expression was cold and resolute. "People who didn't even attend their own grandson's funeral have no right to complain," she said, her voice sharp. "You should reflect on your actions." Mike and his parents fell silent, but the silence didn't last. My father-in-law quickly recovered and began ranting. "You can't just demolish the house and sell the land. I'm the owner of that property," he shouted, brandishing a document. His declaration made me pause. Could he be suffering from dementia as well? He proudly showed us a contract bearing my father's signature, claiming that my father had transferred the property to him, but the document looked suspicious, hastily done, and amateurish. To make matters worse, it stated that the property had been given away for free, an impossibility. "This contract isn't valid," I said, my voice steady, "and for the record, my father suffers from dementia and cannot make sound decisions." Mike and his parents insisted the contract was legitimate, claiming they were unaware of my father's condition. "My father is not the owner of this land," my mother interjected firmly. "The property is registered under my name. You must have coerced him into signing this." Her words shocked me, but they clearly unnerved Mike and his family even more. My uncle stepped forward, producing detailed land records and a lease agreement. "This land and building both belong to Emily's mother. You were renting the property from us," he said, his tone stern. "You stopped paying rent months ago, ignored our attempts to meet, and left us no choice but to terminate the lease and put the property up for sale." Mike's parents stared at the documents in stunned silence. "Were we behind on rent?" my father-in-law asked, turning to my mother-in-law. "I thought it was fine since we're related to Emily's uncle," he muttered. Caught off guard, my mother-in-law confessed. "We were planning to trick your father into giving us the land, so we didn't think paying the rent was necessary." Her admission left me furious. They had schemed to exploit my father's condition from the very beginning. As I tried to process this revelation, Mike pulled out another contract, looking regretful. "Is the house we live in also your property? Does this contract mean nothing too?" he asked, his voice tinged with desperation. The document in his hand, much like the first, bore my father's signature. It was clear Mike had created a fake contract, thinking our home belonged to my father as well. "How ridiculous," my mother said, shaking her head. "You tried to deceive us, without even confirming who owned the land. It's absurd." Mike and his parents stood there, trembling with anger and humiliation. Just then, a young woman appeared from behind a nearby building. "When will you pay me back for the travel expenses I covered? And what about the life insurance payout from your son?" she asked. Her appearance left Mike visibly panicked. My uncle smirked. "Even after your son's death, you took your mistress to Hawaii. You truly are shameless," he said. "We've investigated everything." I was stunned but quickly realized that the woman was Mike's mistress. My uncle must have suspected Mike's infidelity and secretly looked into it. Realizing she'd walked into the middle of a volatile situation, the mistress hurriedly fled. "I didn't think you could stoop so low," I said to Mike. "Our son must be appalled from heaven." Unfazed, Mike chased after her, leaving his parents to face the fallout. "How does it feel to have enjoyed yourselves in Hawaii, relying on my son's life insurance money?" I asked coldly. "Unfortunately for you, I'm the beneficiary. You'll have to pay for your extravagant trip on your own." With no comeback, Mike's parents quickly left. After the funeral, I realized what my mother had meant about removing Mike and his family from our lives. I filed for divorce and sought alimony. It turned out Mike had been cheating on me for 2 years and had planned to abandon me after our son's death, thinking he could avoid responsibilities like child support while benefiting from the life insurance payout. Mike had even exploited my father's dementia, coercing him into signing a fraudulent contract while my mother and I were preoccupied with Ryan's illness. However, he hadn't realized the property belonged to my mother, not my father. In the end, Mike and his parents accrued massive debts. Mike had to pay alimony and cover the cost of their Hawaii trip. His mistress left him, and he was left alone, drowning in financial ruin. Back at my family home, I began to recover from the pain of losing my son. My mother and I continued to care for my father, and I found solace in believing that Ryan was watching over us. One day, my father said something unexpected. "Ryan is visiting. He's running around happily," he murmured. Though startled, I chose to believe that my son's spirit was near, encouraging us to live with strength and positivity. For his sake, I vowed to keep moving forward.
My name is Emma Chin, and my story begins with dirt under my fingernails and the delicate scent of lilies floating on the air. My little flower shop, Blooming Dreams, was nestled between the towering skyscrapers of downtown Seattle, a vibrant burst of life amidst the gray monotony of steel and concrete. Another orchid gave up the ghost. I asked Sarah, my sole employee, as she gingerly removed a wilted plant from the front display. "Third one this week," she replied with a weary sigh, her brow furrowed. "Maybe it's time to stop stocking them." I shook my head, taking the plant from her hands with care. "No, we just need to figure out what's wrong and adjust their care. Every plant can thrive with the right attention." That belief had been my guiding principle since childhood. Growing up in rural China, I spent endless hours in my grandmother's garden, absorbing the unspoken language of plants. While other children played with toys, I buried myself in the intricacies of cultivation and the mysteries of hybridization. "Emma, you have magic in your hands," my grandmother would say as she watched me coax sickly plants back to life. "Remember, the strongest flowers bloom in the harshest conditions." At the time, her words seemed abstract. Now they were the foundation of my life. My journey to America began with a scholarship to study botanical sciences. The transition was far from easy: new culture, new language, and an unrelenting need to prove myself. Yet, like the wildflowers I admired, I thrived in unlikely soil. That's how I met James Wheeler. He stumbled literally into my life during my final year of grad school. Rushing to a business meeting, he barreled into my research greenhouse, scattering soil samples everywhere. "I'm so sorry," he exclaimed, crouching to gather the mess. "I wasn't watching where Whoa, what are these?" His gaze landed on my pride and joy. Hybrid roses I'd spent months perfecting. Their deep purple petals glimmered with silver edges as though dusted with moonlight. "They're my thesis project," I said, hastily inspecting the blooms for damage. "I'm developing resilient varieties for urban environments." "They're stunning," he murmured, and for the first time, I really saw him. Tall, sharp-suited, with warm eyes and a disarming smile. "I'm James, by the way, and I think you just saved my day. I need a unique gift for a client." I sold him 3 roses that day. A week later, he returned, not for flowers, but to ask me to dinner. Our love grew like a well-tended garden, steady, natural, and full of discovery. James worked in corporate finance, a world of sharp suits and strategic deals, but he appreciated the artistry of my work, and I began to admire the structure in his. "You see the world differently than anyone I've ever known," he told me one evening as we strolled through a botanical garden. A year later, we married in a simple ceremony adorned with flowers I'd grown just for the occasion. It was perfect until I met his family. The warning signs appeared early, at our engagement dinner. James's mother, Victoria Wheeler, scrutinized me with icy precision, while his sister Patricia barely hid her smirks. "A florist?" Victoria asked, her voice laden with disbelief. "I thought you said she studied sciences, James." "She has a master's in botanical sciences," James defended. "Emma's work is revolutionary." Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "Yes, but surely you won't continue with that little hobby after the wedding? The Wheeler name has certain standards." James tensed beside me, but I held my ground, recalling my grandmother's words. "Actually," I said evenly, "I'm opening my own shop after graduation. The lease is already signed." The silence was deafening. Patricia raised an eyebrow, her lips curling. A shop? How entrepreneurial. Well, Victoria sighed, every family has its quirks. Just keep it discreet, dear. James squeezed my hand under the table, but he didn't speak up. It was the first crack in our otherwise perfect world. Over the next 2 years, I channeled my energy into my shop, a labor of love that Victoria despised. What none of them knew, not even James, was that I had a plan. During my master's program, I developed patented hybrids, disease-resistant, longer-lasting varieties that could thrive anywhere. Suppliers showed interest, but I played my cards close. Emma, you've got to see this. Sarah burst into my office one morning, brandishing her tablet. Wheeler Corp just announced a sustainable luxury hotel initiative with rooftop gardens. I smiled, setting down my pruning shears. My in-laws had no idea that their grand vision was about to intersect with mine. That evening, James came home beaming. Did you hear about the announcement? Dad's been working on this for months. It's going to transform the company. That's wonderful, I said, arranging a bouquet of my special roses. Mom's hosting a dinner to celebrate this weekend, he added hesitantly. They want us there. I raised an eyebrow. Are you sure your mother wants the shopkeeper at her event? He ran a hand through his hair, his telltale sign of unease. They're trying, Emma, please. Reluctantly, I agreed. That night, as I finalized a deal that would secure my hybrid's future, I received an email that made me smile. Everything was falling into place. The dinner was held at the Wheeler estate, a mansion dripping with opulence and thinly veiled contempt. Victoria greeted me with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. How's your shop, dear? Still managing to scrape by. The room chuckled politely. Patricia, now a senior executive, smirked into her glass. It's quaint, really, she added. We're working with top-tier experts for the hotel gardens, far beyond the scope of a retail shop. I smiled, unbothered. If only they knew. The dinner unfolded with its usual symphony of veiled barbs and carefully crafted insults. James remained uncomfortably quiet, his occasional apologetic glances doing little to shield me from the barrage. His silence, though familiar, was no less painful. So Emma, Victoria said, her voice cutting through the room like fine crystal, James tells me you're often at the shop late into the evening. It must be exhausting dealing with retail customers all day. Surely you've considered something more appropriate for a Wheeler. I set down my fork deliberately, meeting her gaze without flinching. Actually, the dining room door creaked open, interrupting me. The sudden hush that fell over the table was palpable as everyone turned to see who had entered. Victoria's polished smile faltered the moment she recognized the man standing in the doorway. Marcus, Victoria exclaimed, practically launching herself from her seat. What an unexpected delight. We weren't expecting you until next week's board meeting. Marcus Chen, a commanding presence in any room, smiled politely, his sharp eyes sweeping across the table before landing on me. I heard there was a celebration tonight. Thought I'd stop by. Hope I'm not intruding. Patricia, ever eager to align herself with power, quickly motioned to the empty seat beside her. Not at all, Marcus. Please join us. We were just discussing our exciting hotel project. Ah, the Green Hotels Initiative, Marcus said, his tone betraying little. Actually, that's part of why I'm here. His gaze returned to me, and his smile widened. Emma, could we have a moment? The silence was deafening. Victoria's carefully curated composure cracked as confusion etched across her face. You know Emma. Marcus laughed lightly. Know her? Emma has been one of our most valuable partners for 2 years. Those revolutionary hybrid plants you're using in your hotel project? They're all her creations. Victoria's expression froze mid-smile. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. That's impossible, Patricia stammered. She runs a little flower shop. A flower shop that's been ground zero for some of the most innovative botanical research in recent years, Marcus corrected smoothly. Emma's hybrids are transformative, beautiful, resilient, and exactly what the Asian market demands. In fact, that's why I'm here tonight. He stepped forward, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. The board approved your terms, Emma. We're ready to proceed with exclusive distribution rights for all 15 of your patented varieties. James finally broke his silence, his voice hoarse. Emma, what's going on? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Remember the hybrid varieties I worked on during grad school? The ones you said were incredible? I've been refining them ever since. Now, they're ready for mass production. Mass production, Victoria echoed faintly, as if the words themselves were foreign. Indeed, Marcus said, clearly enjoying himself. Emma's hybrids are uniquely suited to luxury hotels and high-end developments. They're durable, exquisite, and most importantly, exclusive. The licensing fees alone are significant. Patricia's champagne flute slipped from her hand, shattering the silence as it hit the table. The deep red liquid spread across the immaculate tablecloth like a blood stain. No one moved to clean it. But you're just a florist, Victoria sputtered. You arrange bouquets and water plants. That shop, I said calmly, has been my research and development lab. Every plant, every arrangement has been part of an experiment. We've collected years of data that's now invaluable. Marcus nodded. Which is why we're not stopping with licensing. We'd like to fund your continued research, Emma. The board is prepared to offer a $50 million annual development budget. Victoria's face drained of color as her world unraveled. James stared at me as though seeing a stranger. Patricia's mouth opened and closed, no words escaping. Finally, Patricia found her voice. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me? I asked evenly. From the moment I joined this family, you've made it clear how you see me. As a simple shopkeeper, someone beneath you. What would change if I told you? But James knew, didn't he? Victoria demanded, her tone accusatory as she turned to her son. James shook his head slowly. I didn't. No, I said quietly. You didn't? You saw what you wanted to see, just like the rest of your family. Marcus cleared his throat, reclaiming the room's attention. There's one more thing. Given the importance of Emma's hybrids to the hotel project, we'd like her to oversee the entire supply chain. To that end, we're proposing to acquire controlling interest in Wheeler Corp's botanical division. Victoria's head snapped up, her carefully maintained composure cracking. You want us to report to her? Actually, I interjected, I already do. I finalized the purchase of Green Life Industries, your primary supplier, this morning. Chaos erupted. Patricia shouted about betrayal and corporate hierarchy, while Victoria collapsed back into her chair, clutching her fan as though it could revive her sinking pride. James said nothing, his silence louder than the clamor around us. This is unacceptable. Victoria finally screeched. James, you can't allow this. I turned to my husband, my voice calm but firm. James hasn't been part of my business decisions, just as he's never been part of your constant belittling. He didn't speak up then, and I doubt he will now. Emma, James began weakly, but I cut him off with a look. Marcus touched my shoulder gently. Shall we? He asked, holding the contracts in hand. As we left the dining room, Victoria's thin, strained voice followed us. James, do something. But there was nothing left to do. The walls of their assumptions had crumbled, leaving only the truth they had refused to see. In my spacious office at Chen Agro Corp's Seattle headquarters, Marcus and I finalized the contracts. The city lights sparkled like distant stars, a reminder of how far I had come. You could have told them sooner, Marcus said, watching me sign the final document. Would it have made a difference? I asked. They needed this moment to understand the cost of underestimating someone. And James? I hesitated, the pen hovering over the page. That's a conversation for another day. When I returned home, James was waiting, his silhouette framed by the darkened window. Were you ever going to tell me? He asked, his voice low. Would you have listened? I countered. Or would you have seen only what your family sees? That's not fair, he said, his voice breaking. I loved you for who you are. Did you? I asked quietly. Or did you love the idea of the wife who made you look broad-minded? The florist you could see past. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The weeks following that fateful dinner party marked a seismic shift, not only for Wheeler Corp, but for the lives orbiting its influence. News of the revelation spread like wildfire through Seattle's corporate circles, altering alliances and reshaping the power dynamics of an elite that prided itself on appearances. Victoria Wheeler, ever the consummate society strategist, launched a campaign to salvage her reputation. Emma always had promise, she declared at a high-profile charity gala, her voice strategically loud. We simply believed in giving her space to realize it. Though I wasn't present, Sarah, my shop manager and newfound informant, relished relaying such moments. She came by the shop, Sarah reported one morning, barely suppressing her laughter. Asked if she could join our exclusive client list. I looked up from the research report I was reviewing. What did you say? That we're no longer taking retail clients, Sarah grinned. You should have seen her face. Patricia, meanwhile, found her once unquestioned authority at Wheeler Corp eroding rapidly. Board members who had previously dismissed my contributions now sought my guidance on critical decisions. Her attempts to reassert control were met with quiet, decisive corrections. At our first official board meeting, I reviewed her proposal for the hotel gardens. These maintenance projections are outdated, I pointed out, displaying comparative data on the screen. The hybrids require specialized care. Unless you prefer, we use standard varieties, which would undermine the exclusivity we've marketed. Patricia's cheeks flushed as she sat back in her chair, silenced by the weight of evidence. While corporate battles played out in boardrooms, a quieter, more personal reckoning unfolded at home. James and I circled each other warily, the foundations of our marriage unsettled. One evening, I found him in my home office, staring at the framed patents on the wall. I remember when you created this, he said, his fingers brushing the glass. I thought they were just pretty flowers. They were never just flowers, James, I said. They were my dreams, my future, and I tried to share them with you. He turned, guilt and frustration etched into his features. Why didn't you trust me with the truth? Because trust isn't silence, I replied. Every time your family dismissed me, every time they belittled my work, you said nothing. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I was trying to keep the peace. No, I said softly. You were taking the easy way out. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. Richard Wheeler, usually the quiet observer, stood at my office door. May I come in? He asked. I gestured to the chair opposite me, curious. I owe you an apology, he began. For 2 years, I've watched as Victoria and Patricia undermined you, and I said nothing. That was wrong. Why now? I asked, wary. His expression softened with regret. Because you've done what I never had the courage to do. Challenge the Wheeler way of doing things. This company needs leadership, not legacy. He handed me a folder. I'm stepping down as chairman. I'd like to recommend you as my successor. I blinked, stunned. That's unexpected. You've already proven yourself, he said simply. Before I could respond, James burst into the room, his argument with my assistant echoing through the hallway. He froze when he saw his father. Dad, what are you doing here? Richard stood, straightening his tie. The right thing for once. After Richard left, I explained the situation to James. He sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Chairman? Of Wheeler Corp, he murmured. Why are you here, James? I asked gently. He looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of determination and vulnerability. I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us. About me. For years, I've lived as the perfect Wheeler son, never questioning anything. And in doing so, I failed you. I want to make it right. How? I asked. I've requested a transfer to the Asian division, he said. If you'll have me, I want to go with you. Not as the Wheeler heir, but as your partner. Tears pricked my eyes. You'd leave everything here. Everything I'm leaving is meaningless without you, he said simply. 2 months later, Victoria hosted another dinner party. I wasn't there, of course. James and I were in Singapore, overseeing the installation of my hybrid gardens in a flagship luxury hotel. Sarah sent me a video from the event. Victoria, tipsy and effusive, regaling guests with tales of her brilliant daughter-in-law. Patricia, meanwhile, had taken a position at a rival firm, unwilling to endure the company's new dynamics. Richard, now serving as an advisor, worked alongside me to steer Wheeler Corp into its next chapter. As our plane descended into Singapore's glittering skyline, James reached for my hand. Ready for our new adventure? He asked. I smiled, squeezing his hand. Always. The real triumph wasn't in proving anyone wrong or claiming titles. It was in staying true to myself, nurturing my dreams through the storms of judgment and doubt. My little flower shop had bloomed into a legacy beyond what anyone imagined, except perhaps me, because I had always believed that with care, patience, and resilience. Even the smallest seed could transform into something extraordinary.
Your presence here ruins the atmosphere of the venue. Could you please leave? He sneered. Though he was technically my brother-in-law's father, his words cut deep. I had traveled a long way to celebrate my sister's wedding, only to find out I was an uninvited guest to the groom's family. What's the matter? Hurry up and leave. Just having someone like you here ruins the wedding, he spat. Understanding I wasn't welcome, I nodded. Understood. I'll take my leave. I stepped outside and called my husband. What's going on? Why are you here? He asked, concern in his voice. I was told to leave, so I did, I answered honestly. There was nothing else to say. What does this mean? He muttered darkly, turning his gaze toward the groom's family. They stared back, unrepentant. My name is Lisa, and I'm 32 years old. I live with my husband, who is 11 years older than me. The only family I have left are him and my younger sister, Summer, who is 10 years younger. Our father left when I was 10, leaving us in a single-parent household. Summer had just been born, and our mother worked tirelessly to raise us. She juggled jobs from morning till night, and I stepped in to take care of my sister. Despite the hardship, I never complained. We managed until I graduated high school, but years of overwork caught up with my mother, and she passed away. With no extended family to rely on, Summer and I were left to fend for ourselves. What's going to happen to us now, sis? Summer asked, her young face full of fear. Don't worry, I'll manage somehow, I reassured her, though I had no plan. I found a job as a clerk at a small company. The pay wasn't great, but they were willing to hire a high school graduate. It was a small workplace, so I quickly found myself handling a variety of tasks. At first, it was simple clerical work, but my responsibilities grew over time. The boss, however, was kind and supportive. Lisa, would you like to earn a qualification? He asked one day. A qualification? Yes, it's a bit specialized, but we need someone qualified. And you're young, it shouldn't be too hard for you to study, he explained. Would this be outside of working hours? Don't worry, we'll cover the exam fees and textbook costs. Please, I'm asking as a favor. The boss's earnest demeanor made it hard to refuse. Besides, earning a qualification could open more doors for me in the future. I thought of Summer, her needs would only grow as she advanced through middle and high school. Understood, I agreed. Don't push yourself too hard, sis, Summer would sometimes say, her voice filled with concern. Don't worry about me. When you graduate high school, you can do whatever you want, I told her. As she entered high school, Summer began considering working right after graduation, but I didn't want her to struggle the way I had, so I convinced her to aim for college. There was one problem: my salary made saving for tuition difficult. I began thinking about changing jobs. When I confided in my boss, I expected disappointment, but he was surprisingly understanding. I completely understand, he said. Actually, I know someone starting a new company. They're looking for someone to handle clerical work. A new company? Yes, and don't worry, it's run by someone very capable. Their business is already doing well, and they're looking for talented employees. The boss assured me the new company's work would be similar to what I was already doing. It sounded ideal, though leaving felt bittersweet. I've been thinking of closing this company soon anyway, my boss admitted. Most of us here are nearing retirement, and it's getting harder to keep up, so don't worry about leaving, you've done more than enough. After 5 years with the company, hearing his kind words brought tears to my eyes. Don't cry, he said gently. If I make a young girl cry, my wife will scold me. It's better when you smile. With his blessing, I joined the new company. Nice to meet you, I'm Mike. My new boss introduced himself. He was 38, with an air of professionalism that was hard to miss. Nice to meet you, I'm Lisa, I replied. We really needed someone with your qualifications. You've been a great help already, Mike said warmly. If you could handle things at your previous company, I'm confident you'll excel here. Thank you very much, I said, feeling both nervous and excited for what lay ahead. I was nervous, but I think I handled it well. Before I knew it, Mike's company had become my new workplace. It was a startup, aggressively expanding, and Mike was at the center of it all. Though it was a new company, it seemed well-backed, with many big projects already on the table. I'm really grateful to have you here, Lisa, Mike said one day. Your office skills are specialized, and it helps that you have such a strong background. I'm glad I invested in your training. His words made me happy, and as time went on, I could see the company growing. Mike appreciated my work, and I no longer worried about my sister's tuition or our daily expenses. "You seem so lively these days," my sister commented one morning. "Really? Before, you always seemed overwhelmed by work, but now you seem to enjoy it. Maybe it's because of someone," I teased. "Mike?" she asked, joking. "Don't be silly," I laughed. "Go get ready for school." 4 years later, I was 27, and my sister was about to graduate high school. She was doing well in school and aiming for her preferred university, barring any health issues. She was expected to pass. Meanwhile, Mike's company was flourishing, taking on larger projects, and Mike was a brilliant leader, always bringing in new work and building partnerships. The number of employees quickly increased, and before I knew it, I was training new hires. "How about a trip sometime?" Mike suggested. "A trip? But my schedule." I anticipated that. "I'll make sure to wrap things up early. Leave it to me." "Thank you, but that feels like a luxury." Mike insisted. "Let's relax a bit. You've earned it." As part of the founding team, I spent a lot of time with Mike. Naturally, our relationship grew romantic. Despite the 11-year age difference, it didn't matter to me, but there was one thing on my mind: could we wait to get married? One late night, just the two of us in the office, I decided to share my feelings. "Mike, it's not that I don't want to marry you. You're a wonderful man, and I do want to marry you, but I have my sister. She's much younger than me, and until she's independent, I can't leave her. Could we wait until she graduates?" I feared it was a selfish request. Mike, already in his mid-30s, was likely thinking seriously about marriage. I wasn't sure if it was too much to ask. "Of course, I'll wait until she graduates," Mike said, without hesitation, "but in return, let's have dinner with your sister. After all, she'll be family." I was touched by his understanding. His assertiveness was part of what made him such a successful entrepreneur. So, the three of us began spending more time together. As Mike's company stabilized and my sister neared the end of her high school years, we all decided to go on a trip together. It was a wonderful experience, one we wished could last forever. But eventually, the trip ended. My sister went off to college, and Mike and I returned to work. Since the university was nearby, my sister still lived with me, but I knew we'd see less of each other. Around that time, she told me she wanted to get a part-time job. "Sure, everyone starts with no experience," I said, though I was still a little worried. "I'll be fine," she reassured me. "I've been learning about business management from Mike. I'm ready." Her optimism surprised me. She was so much more mature than I had expected. She had always been like that, and her positivity had helped me through tough times. Then, one day, she surprised me even more. "Sis, guess what?" she said, her eyes sparkling. "What is it?" "I'm getting married after college." I was stunned. "Married? Sorry, what?" She continued nonchalantly. "I'm serious about marrying after graduation." "Who's the guy?" "You don't know him. Or maybe you do." "Don't mess with me," I said, half in disbelief. In the summer of her junior year, she announced her plans to get married. I was completely shocked, though she often said surprising things. I hadn't expected her to go this far. The word marriage was sensitive for me, especially considering my thoughts about Mike and me. "Remember the business seminar?" she asked. "I clicked with a guy there. He's planning to start his own company, and he's a good guy, so I thought, why not marry him?" "Marriage isn't something to take lightly," I said, my voice rising. "It's a big commitment, a lifetime decision." I almost expressed my bitterness about our parents, but held it back. My sister gave me a direct look. "Don't you want to respond to Mike's feelings?" she asked. "But I promised to look after you until I graduate. You think I can't manage without you? I've got my life planned, and I've met a good guy. You need to think about your own happiness." Tears welled up in her eyes. She was no longer the little girl I had cared for. "Unless you get married first, it's awkward for me," she said. "I guess so," I replied softly. Mike and I ended up getting married, and everyone at the company celebrated. Even my first boss came to offer his congratulations. But I still had one more task: meeting my sister's fiancé's family. Brian, her fiancé, seemed like a great guy. He was the eldest son of a small business owner. "The business is going to my brother, though," Brian explained. "Really?" I asked, curious. "I always wanted to start my own business," he said, "and I liked the idea of working with our family business, so we decided to start our own company together." "That's how we met," he added, smiling. "Pretty cool, right? We've already incorporated, even as students." Student entrepreneurship isn't that uncommon these days. I was an employee myself, so I couldn't fully follow their discussions, but Brian's family seemed like good people, and I felt he was compatible with my sister. I didn't worry about their future. It was Mike who had introduced Summer to Brian, and he had played a key role in connecting them. I was grateful to him. Our first meeting ended on a warm note, but I still had to meet the rest of Brian's family. It was a natural step, now that we were becoming relatives, but the business owners made me nervous. Strangely, they asked me to come alone. Lisa, yes? I believe you're here to discuss your sister's marriage to Brian. That's correct, I replied, trying to remain composed. That's not why we called you. My father-in-law's voice was sharp. We're here to ask you not to get involved. I was taken aback. What do you mean? You never went to college, you lost your parents, and while Summer seems capable, you certainly don't. Don't expect any help from us. I have no intention of relying on you. I shot back. I've worked hard all my life, supported myself, and planned for my future with Mike. Whether I retire later or not is none of your concern. Words are cheap, my father-in-law sneered. There are many unreliable people out there. We'll invite you to the wedding out of courtesy, but afterward, stay away. The people attending will be far above your station. It would be embarrassing for you to show up. Their laughter echoed with scorn, and I couldn't bear it any longer. When my sister gets married, she'll have a proper family with Brian. Let's hope she doesn't end up like you, they added cruelly. Tears welled in my eyes, but I held my head high as I excused myself. I won't miss my sister's special day, I said firmly, though my voice trembled. As soon as I was outside, I half ran home, tears streaming uncontrollably. No matter how much I washed my face, the pain lingered. Looking at my red, swollen eyes in the mirror, I whispered to myself, I'll never let them see me like this again. The insults didn't just hurt me, they felt like an attack on everyone who had supported me throughout my life. But no matter what, I resolved to attend my sister's wedding. Watching her get married felt like a final act of letting go, a passing of the torch. Time flew by, and soon, her college graduation and wedding day arrived. You'd better come to my wedding, sis, my sister teased. I've planned an amazing day. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I replied with a smile, hiding my unease about seeing Brian's family again. The venue was extravagant, and the guests exuded wealth and prestige, dressed in formal wear. I felt overwhelmed but kept my composure as I showed my invitation to the usher. He guided me to a private room. As soon as the door opened, mocking voices greeted me. So, you actually came. You really don't understand social cues, do you? Standing before me were Brian's father, mother, and younger brother Dustin, all dressed in high-end suits and designer attire. Why are you here? Dustin sneered. Do you not realize how far beneath us you are? Having someone like you here lowers the venue's prestige. You weren't really meant to show up, his father added. Even though we invited you, we expected you to know better. Get the guards to remove her, Dustin said dismissively. The flood of insults continued, cutting deep. I endured them silently until they crossed the line. What if Summer ends up like you? Dustin spat. She won't, I snapped, my voice shaking. Summer is hardworking and smart. Besides, she and Brian are starting their own business together. Ridiculous. Brian will take over our company, not start some side project, his father scoffed. That's not what they said, I countered. They've already incorporated their own company. Their faces twisted in disbelief. Before they could hurl more accusations, the door opened. Sorry I'm late. Mike's voice filled the room. The family's demeanor shifted instantly. Mike, it's been too long. They greeted him warmly, falling over themselves to show respect. Mike ignored their pleasantries. Have you seen my wife? Your wife, they echoed, shocked. Oh, there she is, Mike said, spotting me in the corner. Why are you standing there? They told me to leave, I said softly. Mike's expression darkened. Why would you tell my wife to leave? She's also the bride's sister. The room fell silent, their faces pale. We didn't know, the father stammered. Explain what happened, Mike demanded. I recounted everything truthfully. So, you insulted my wife and tried to humiliate her? Mike's voice was icy. Insulting her is the same as insulting me. Is that how you treat family? We didn't mean to insult her, they stuttered, visibly sweating. Then what did you mean? Mike's piercing gaze made them shrink. After a long pause, he continued, I do business with your company, but we're not family. Brian is my friend, but that doesn't mean I'll tolerate disrespect toward my wife. Effective immediately, I'll be ending our business relationship. Wait, that will ruin us, Brian's father cried. Please reconsider. I won't. Don't worry, though, I'll work with Brian and Summer's new company instead. They've earned my trust. The family looked stunned, realizing they had lost both their son's loyalty and a critical business partner. Mike turned to me. Let's go, he said, leading me out of the room. The wedding proceeded without further drama. Brian and Summer began their new life together, moving into a new home as they focused on growing their business. Meanwhile, the in-laws faced the consequences of their actions, their company struggling without Mike's support. As for us, life brought a new chapter. I gently patted my belly one evening, excitement and nervousness filling me. When Mike returned home, I greeted him with his favorite stew and a big smile. I have news, I said, placing his hand on my stomach. His eyes lit up. Really? That's amazing. He hugged me gently. With a baby on the way, our family was growing, and though our responsibilities would increase, I knew we could handle it. Together, we would build a happy home filled with love and hope for the future. Out in the mountains, far from anyone, my mother-in-law glared at me. Take care now, she said coldly before slamming the door of her fancy SUV. The sound echoed in the quiet night as gravel flew from the spinning tires. She drove off quickly, leaving me alone. Under the moonlight, I caught a glimpse of her face. For the first time, I saw her cruel smile and the glint of her eyes, sharp and dangerous like a predator. She looked at me like she'd already won. Mom, why? I whispered, my voice shaking, but she just leaned out the window and laughed. It was a chilling sound, full of triumph. Goodbye, Emily, she sneered. No one's coming to help you. By tomorrow, you'll just be food for the wolves. Her words cut through me like ice. The roar of her SUV's engine faded as the headlights disappeared into the dark, leaving me frozen in disbelief. I reached for my phone, desperate to call for help, but it wouldn't turn on. Then I remembered, earlier, she had borrowed my charger. She had planned all this. She tricked me into coming out here under the pretense of showing me a stargazing spot. I felt so foolish. Maybe if I had tried harder to get along with her, or if I had been more serious about handling things with my husband, this wouldn't have happened. But now, standing in the freezing night, I was alone, with only the distant howls of animals echoing in the distance. Fear crept through me. I could feel something watching from the shadows between the trees. The crunch of leaves and heavy footsteps came closer. My heart pounded as I backed away, unsure which direction was safe. Behind me, the sound of footsteps grew louder. I'm Emily Matthews, 26 years old, married to John for 2 years. John has always been kind and supportive. When I was overwhelmed with work or unwell, he would cook for me or help me feel better. Marrying him was the best decision of my life. I come from a well-off family, but I worked hard to build a life of my own. I didn't want to rely on my parents' money, so I kept my family's wealth a secret from John. I wanted to live by my own efforts. John and I both worked in the bridal industry, and I loved my job. But then John decided to quit his stable job to start his own business. Though worried, I supported him because I believed in his determination. Then, I found out the truth. John had been in a relationship with another woman from his college days. Not only that, but he had racked up $50,000 in debt from extravagant trips with her. I had no idea and was devastated when I learned about it. To my horror, he started his business with that same woman as his partner. He claimed his family was supporting him financially. His mother, Susan, adored him and justified everything he did. She treated me as if I was trying to steal her son. Meanwhile, John's sister, Megan, lived off him completely. She refused to work, saying she didn't want to deal with things like speaking formally to her boss. She seemed entitled and difficult, which made dealing with her exhausting. For a while, I endured it all because I loved John, but Susan and Megan started visiting our home often, rummaging through my belongings without permission. They used my expensive, cherished items as props for their social media, treating them carelessly. One day, Susan took my favorite brown purse without asking and broke it. I hoped she'd apologize, but instead, she smirked and said, "It was bought with John's money, so I don't owe you anything." I felt crushed. Even though I earned a good income, I couldn't keep replacing my things endlessly. I reminded Susan that the bag she broke was something I bought before I got married. It was my first big purchase, something I had dreamed of owning. "Yeah, right," she scoffed. "Girls like you don't have money for things like that. Don't try to fool me." She had already labeled me as a gold digger, accusing me of spending John's money on luxuries. It was impossible to talk to her. She didn't even try to understand. She only saw me as an enemy. When I turned to John for support, he barely listened. "Just hold on a little longer. Mom's going through a rough time," he said, It hurt so much to feel ignored, even by him. I had always thought of myself as strong and independent, but being so alone was overwhelming. Around that time, John's business started to fail. He couldn't keep up with Susan and Megan's expensive lifestyles anymore. He finally told them he couldn't support them financially. They panicked, but instead of considering getting jobs, they came up with another plan. "Take some of Emily's money and give it to us. Family comes first," Susan declared. I explained, again, that I split living expenses with John and used my own income, but they didn't believe me. Their frustration grew, and for a while, they visited less often. I thought maybe they were starting to accept reality. I was wrong. They were plotting something far worse. When Susan found out about my wealthy family, her resentment deepened. She became obsessed, convinced that if I disappeared, they could control John's money and even inherit a fortune from me. She imagined millions, even though I hadn't written a will, and my family, not them, would inherit everything. Her twisted thinking led her to a horrifying plan. Susan knew I loved photography, especially taking pictures of the night sky. She researched remote locations with little human activity and found a spot where she thought no one would find me. "Out here, no one will ever find you. It's bear season, this'll look like an accident," she told Megan. Megan agreed without hesitation. "I'll drive for you, Mom. We're doing this for John," she said, pretending it was for his sake, though it was really all for their own benefit. On the day of the plan, Susan called me with an unusually friendly tone. "Emily, I know you love stargazing. There's a spot nearby with the most beautiful stars. Want to go?" she asked. Feeling hesitant but hopeful, I agreed. They seemed so kind that day, chatting about beauty and fashion, even complimenting my hair. "I've always wanted a daughter like you," Susan said warmly. It felt strange, but I wanted to believe they were finally accepting me. When we reached the spot, they encouraged me to step out and take pictures. "We'll grab some things from the car and join you," they said. I stepped out, looking up at the breathtaking stars, but then I heard the car door slam. I turned to see them locking the doors and starting the engine. "We'll be taking the house and car, watch out for bears, honey," Susan shouted as they sped off, leaving me alone in the cold, dark mountains. Fear gripped me as I realized I had been abandoned, but I wasn't entirely unprepared. I had a backup plan. Meanwhile, Susan and Megan were celebrating. "It's all taken care of," Susan said, grinning. They went out for a fancy dinner, thinking their troubles were over. But when they returned home, their celebration ended in shock. Police cars were waiting in the driveway. Standing beside them was me, calm and unharmed, alongside my father and several officers. "What? How are you here?" Susan stammered, frozen in disbelief. Megan tried to sneak away, but the police stopped her. I had been rescued thanks to my father's safety measures. Since I was young, he had insisted on tracking my location through GPS and having a backup emergency system. When I realized something was wrong, I activated it. My father, who had access to a private jet, reached me quickly. The clear stargazing spot made it easy for them to land and rescue me. I had also recorded the entire car ride, as my father had advised me to always record suspicious situations. "We'll be taking the house and car, watch out for bears," Susan's voice rang out clearly from my phone. The evidence was undeniable. Susan and Megan were arrested on the spot for attempted murder and fraud. Susan fainted, and Megan broke down in hysterics, blaming her mother. John, meanwhile, was exposed for being with his mistress all along. He testified against his family, but it was just another betrayal in a series of heartbreaks. The story became a media sensation. Headlines mocked Susan as the mother-in-law who wanted millions. Details about how Susan and Megan used my belongings for social media clout went viral. John, who had once prided himself on his reputation, now couldn't even leave the house without facing shame. As for Susan and Megan, their disgrace didn't end with their arrests. Someone leaked their phone numbers, and they were bombarded with calls from angry strangers. The next day, all of Susan and Megan's bank accounts were frozen, and everything they owned was seized. Without John's income, they couldn't afford anything. To make matters worse, news about John's mistress spread all over the internet, destroying his reputation completely. The man who had betrayed me had now lost everything, including his dignity. I found out John had been with his mistress since the beginning of our marriage. Remembering the kind things he once did for me now felt like a cruel joke. Why had he married me if he never truly loved me? My heart ached with pain and betrayal, but I resolved to move on. Susan and Megan were evicted from their luxurious apartment and moved into public housing. It didn't take long before their new location was leaked online. Susan became mentally unstable, constantly muttering about how her life was over. Megan, abandoned by her own family, tried to work part-time jobs but struggled due to a lack of skills and work ethic. Megan even messaged me, asking for help getting a job like mine. Working at weddings and wearing nice clothes sounds fun, she said. I ignored her. The bridal industry wasn't something she could just jump into, and their downfall wasn't my responsibility. Meanwhile, Susan moved into a rundown apartment surrounded by graffiti and decay. As for me, I left the house I'd once shared with John, along with all my possessions, and returned to my parents' home. It felt safer, even though I still carried emotional scars. One day, John unexpectedly called me. Seeing his name on the screen made my stomach churn. Emily, I'm so sorry, I've cut ties with my mom. Please, let's try again, he said, but his promises felt hollow. How could I trust him again after everything? Maybe your mistress needs your protection more than I do, I replied coldly, ending the call. Susan wasn't done yet. Desperate and bitter, she hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me. When the detective found nothing, Susan latched onto a small detail, my PTSD. She thought she could use it against me. One evening, as I walked alone, Susan suddenly appeared on the sidewalk. Her clothes were shabby, but her face wore a twisted grin. Guess the bears didn't get you, she sneered. Her words sent a wave of fear through me as memories of that night in the mountains flooded back. She even threatened to spread a video of me unless I paid her. Though her threat made no sense, her presence terrified me. She climbed into a car and drove away, leaving me shaken. I called my father, who was furious. Using his resources, he discovered evidence of tax evasion and fraud in John's business. When confronted, John had no choice but to admit his guilt. His mistress, Lena, was shocked to learn she was tied to his shady dealings. Their lies and schemes unraveled, leaving them exposed and humiliated. John's accounts were frozen, and he lost everything. Even his mother, Susan, abandoned him, saying, "You're no son of mine." Both of them were left with nothing, their selfishness leading to their complete downfall. Despite everything, I focused on healing and finding a new purpose. My experience inspired me to help others escape toxic families and rebuild their lives. With my parents' support, I opened a refuge center in the family retreat where I'd once been rescued. It became a safe haven for those who needed a fresh start. I even earned a counseling qualification to guide others through their pain. Over time, the refuge grew, welcoming people who needed a safe place to heal. One day, a woman arrived, escaping her abusive family. I reassured her, "You've done so well to get out. I'm glad I left when I did, too." Her tears turned to a soft smile as I reminded her it was okay to acknowledge the pain and set boundaries. With time, I began to smile again, finding joy in helping others rebuild their lives. Susan, Megan, and John continued to struggle, but I felt no pity. They were simply reaping the consequences of their own actions. Meanwhile, the refuge became a place of hope, ensuring no one else would have to face the kind of pain I once endured.
Growing up in a family of restaurateurs, I quickly learned that food was more than just nourishment. It was an art form, a legacy, and a powerful way to bring people together. My grandmother's small noodle shop in Chinatown had sustained our family for 3 generations. Watching her expertly craft dishes in the tiny kitchen shaped my understanding of the world. "Remember, May," she'd say, her hands skillfully folding dumplings. "Good food comes from the heart, not just the ingredients." I'd internalized those words, spending countless hours in the kitchen, absorbing not only recipes but the business wisdom that had helped our family navigate tough times. What no one knew was that I was also pursuing an online MBA, studying late into the night after the restaurant had closed. During the day, I mastered the delicate balance of flavors and the importance of fresh ingredients. At night, I delved into market analysis, business strategy, and corporate finance. My ambition extended beyond running a restaurant. I aimed to revolutionize the food industry. Then, I met James. He walked into our restaurant one rainy Tuesday evening, seeking refuge from the storm. Tall, impeccably dressed, and distinctly out of place, he immediately caught my attention. "What would you recommend?" he asked, water dripping from his expensive coat. "Our hand-pulled noodles with braised beef," I replied without hesitation. "It's perfect for a night like this." He smiled, a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "I trust your judgment." 20 minutes later, I watched as he took his first bite. His eyes widened in surprise, then closed in delight. When they opened again, they locked onto mine. "This is incredible," he said. "I've never tasted anything like it." That moment marked the beginning of our story. James became a regular, visiting 3 times a week, always trying something new. Our conversations began with food but quickly expanded to everything else. He worked in finance at a major investment firm, while I shared stories about the restaurant, carefully omitting my MBA and larger ambitions. 6 months later, he proposed, simple and intimate, just us in the restaurant after closing over a bowl of the noodles he first tasted. Meeting his family was a different story. The Chens were old money, with a business empire encompassing restaurants, hotels, and real estate. James's father, Richard Chen, was CEO of Chen Global Hospitality, one of Asia's largest luxury hotel and restaurant groups. His mother, Victoria, embodied old-world elegance, while his sister, Amanda, was the company's director of operations. From the start, it was clear I didn't fit their ideal image of a daughter-in-law. A small restaurant? Victoria's perfectly manicured eyebrows arched during our first meeting. How quaint. Amanda's disdain was more overt. James, you can't be serious. We're Chens. We own restaurant chains, not street food stalls. James squeezed my hand under the table but remained silent, a red flag I chose to overlook. The engagement dinner was a subtle exercise in humiliation. Held at the Chen's flagship restaurant, the Imperial Palace, it was clear they viewed me as an outsider. "My dear," Victoria called across the table, "it's fascinating that you work in food service. Do you cook everything yourself, or do you have actual chefs?" Before I could respond, Amanda added, "Mother, be kind. I'm sure she does her best with what she has. Not everyone can afford proper culinary training." Drawing on years of customer service experience, I maintained my composure. "I trained under my grandmother." "Whoa. Oh, how sweet," Victoria interrupted. "Family recipes. James, remember our cooking class in Paris with the Michelin-starred chef?" James chuckled uncomfortably. "Mother, please." But the most painful part wasn't their condescension. It was James's silence. He never once defended me or our relationship. What they didn't know was that, while managing my tiny restaurant, I had completed my MBA with honors and developed an AI-driven food service platform poised to revolutionize the industry. My company, Food Tech Solutions, was already valued at over $3 billion, operating in stealth mode. I had kept this private, wanting to be judged for who I was, not what I owned. But as wedding preparations began, it became clear that the Chens would never accept me. The breaking point came during a family dinner at Victoria's mansion. I brought some of my signature dishes to share my heritage. Victoria wrinkled her nose at the containers. "Oh, he brought takeout." "Actually, I made these myself," I said proudly. "They're my grandmother's recipes." Amanda prodded the food with her fork. "How authentic. But for the wedding, we should stick to proper catering. We have a reputation to maintain." James, beside me, focused intently on his phone. "The wedding menu is settled," Victoria announced. "Chef Pierre from Paris will cater. We can have street food at a Chen wedding." "My food isn't," I began, but Victoria raised a hand. "My dear, understand that the Chens are more than a family. We're a brand. Your little restaurant is charming, but it's not up to our standards. After the wedding, we could help you find a more suitable occupation." My phone buzzed. It was an alert. Chen Global Hospitality's stock had plummeted 30% in after-hours trading due to leaked quarterly losses and potential fraud in their restaurant division. Victoria turned ashen. Amanda frantically typed, and Richard barked orders into his phone. James turned to me, pale. "I need to go to the office. Family emergency." I stood calmly. "Actually, I think I can help." Everyone froze. "Help?" Amanda sneered, though her voice wavered. "Unless you can conjure $500 million, your noodle expertise isn't relevant." I pulled my laptop from my bag. "Actually, I'd like to show you something." Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "May, dear, this is hardly the time for Food Tech Solutions," I interjected calmly, turning my laptop around to face them. "Have you heard of it?" The color drained from Amanda's face. Of course she had. Every major player in the hospitality industry knew about the enigmatic tech company revolutionizing restaurant operations worldwide. Richard lowered his phone, eyes narrowing. "What about it?" "I founded it 3 years ago," I said simply. "It's currently valued at $3.2 billion. And yes, Amanda, I can produce that $500 million you need, and more. A heavy silence fell over the room. James gaped at me. But you run a small restaurant. I run several things, James. The restaurant is my passion. Food tech solutions is where my business acumen thrives. I turned to Victoria. Those street food recipes you mocked are the foundation of an AI-driven menu optimization system now used by five-star restaurants worldwide. Richard leaned forward, his earlier disdain replaced by keen interest. You're saying you're the CEO of Food Tech Solutions, the company every hospitality group is chasing. The same, I confirmed, pulling up our financials. We're in stealth mode but plan to go public next quarter. Our AI platform revolutionizes everything from inventory management to customer preference prediction. Something your company desperately needs right now. I gestured to Amanda's laptop, showing their dismal financial report. Victoria's hand trembled as she set down her wine glass. But why didn't you tell us? She asked, voice faltering. Would it have made a difference? I asked softly. Would it have made me more worthy of respect? More suitable as a daughter-in-law? The fact that you're even asking speaks volumes. Amanda's face reddened with anger. You expect us to believe you, a restaurant owner, built a billion-dollar tech company in secret? I displayed a screen of patents and proprietary algorithms. Your crisis stems from outdated systems and manual inventory management. These are exactly the issues my technology solves. Richard's business instincts flared. We should discuss this privately, perhaps over dinner at the Imperial. No, I cut in. We'll discuss it here, where you've belittled me for months. You've made it clear I'm not good enough for your family. James finally spoke. May, why didn't you tell me? I looked at him, a profound sadness settling in. I wanted you to stand up for me for who I am, not for what I own. But you never did. Victoria tried to recover. Darling, you must understand. We have standards. Yes, you've made those standards clear, I said firmly. Now let me set mine. Chen Global Hospitality is on the brink of collapse. I can help, but there will be conditions. Amanda's eyes darkened. Conditions? This is blackmail. No, Amanda, this is business. I stood smoothing my dress. You've treated me like I'm beneath you. Now you need my help. Can your pride handle that? Richard's tone turned conciliatory. Name your conditions. First, a complete reorganization of your management. Your leadership is incompetent. I glanced at Amanda, who sputtered indignantly. Second, full implementation of Food Tech Solutions systems across all properties. Your outdated methods are bleeding money. Third, I continued, a public acknowledgement of our partnership and the fact that I, owner of that little restaurant, saved Chen Global Hospitality. Victoria gasped. You can't expect us to. I can. Your stock is in free fall. By morning, you'll have lost half your market value. Your investors are already calling for heads to roll. James reached for my hand. May, please, let's talk. I pulled away. We need to discuss our relationship, James. The room grew silent again. You've let your family insult me, my heritage, and my work for months. You've laughed with them, sat quietly, and never stood up for me. Even tonight, your first instinct was to flee to the office instead of defending me. Tears welled in my eyes, but my voice stayed steady. I don't need a partner who only values me for my wealth. I need someone who would defend me when I had nothing. Victoria rose, her composure slipping. Now see here. No, you see here. I cut her off. I hope to be accepted for who I am. Instead, you've shown me who you are. Accept my terms and save your company or let your pride destroy it. I gather my things, including the untouched containers of my street food. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. My team will be in touch. As I walked to the door, Amanda called out, You can't just walk away. This is our legacy. I turned one last time, yes, and you've run it into the ground. If you had focused on innovation instead of judgment, you wouldn't be here. The last thing I saw was James's stricken face, Victoria's trembling hands, and Richard's calculating stare. Their empire was crumbling, and their only hope lay in the woman they had deemed unworthy. Sometimes, karma wears a business suit and carries recipes in takeout containers. The next morning, in my sleek penthouse office overlooking the city, I reviewed our latest ad data. My phone buzzed incessantly. Messages from James, Richard's lawyers, and finally, Victoria herself. My assistant, Sarah, entered with a fresh cup of green tea. The Chen family is in the lobby. All of them. I checked my watch. 7:30 a.m., right on schedule. Give them 10 minutes, then send them up. Those 10 minutes mattered. A negotiation lesson from my grandmother. Let them wait, she'd say. Anxiety seasons any dish. When they finally entered my office, their transformation was stark. Victoria's aristocratic poise had crumbled, Amanda's designer outfit seemed hastily thrown together, and Richard's face wore the strain of a sleepless night. James lingered at the back, looking utterly lost. The paperwork is ready, I said without preamble, gesturing toward the documents on the conference table. Shall we begin? Richard stepped forward. Before we start, I want to say. Save it, I interrupted. This is a business meeting, nothing more. Your company is hemorrhaging value by the minute. Let's focus on that. For the next 2 hours, we methodically went through the terms. Food Tech Solutions would acquire a 40% stake in Cheng Global Hospitality in exchange for emergency funding and the full implementation of our systems. Amanda would step down as Director of Operations, to be replaced by someone from my team. This is highway robbery, Amanda sputtered, but Richard silenced her with a glare. It's more than fair, I replied calmly. You're getting cutting-edge technology, immediate financial stability, and a partnership that will elevate your market value. In return, I gain partial ownership of a company in desperate need of modernization. Victoria, who had remained unusually quiet, finally spoke. And what about James? I met her gaze steadily. James is not part of this discussion. Business and personal matters should remain separate, something your family never seemed to grasp. James stepped forward. May, please. Can we talk privately? I considered for a moment before nodding. 5 minutes. The rest of you can review the documents with my legal team. In my private office, James paced nervously. Why didn't you tell me about any of this? Would it have changed anything? I asked. Would you have stood up to your family sooner? Defended my little restaurant against their constant criticism? I was trying to keep the peace. No, James. You were choosing the path of least resistance. Each time your family insulted me, my heritage, my work, you chose silence. That silence said everything. He ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. I love you, May. Isn't that enough? Love without respect isn't love, James. It's convenience. I stood up. Your family's company is in crisis because they refuse to adapt, to see value in different perspectives. You're not so different. Give me another chance, he pleaded. Now that I understand. That's the problem. I cut in. You only want another chance because now you know I'm wealthy and successful. But I'm the same person I was yesterday, running my little restaurant with pride. If you couldn't love and respect that person, you don't deserve to know this one. Back in the conference room, the documents were ready for signing. Richard's hand trembled slightly as he signed away 40% of his family's legacy. Victoria watched with tears in her eyes, while Amanda sat stiffly, barely containing her fury. As the papers were notarized, I made one final announcement. One more thing. My grandmother's restaurant, it's not for sale at any price. It will continue operating exactly as it has for 3 generations. But surely with your resources, Victoria began. That restaurant is my heritage, my heart. It's everything you looked down on, everything you mocked. And it will remain exactly as it is. A reminder that success doesn't always wear a designer label or come with a luxury brand name. Over the next 6 months, Chen Global Hospitality underwent a complete transformation. Our AI systems revolutionized their operations, cutting costs while improving service quality. Their stock not only recovered but soared to new heights. The press loved the story. A traditional family business saved by innovative technology from an unexpected source. James sent flowers, letters, even tried to visit the restaurant. I returned the flowers, left the letters unopened, and had security politely escort him out. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. 1 year later, I sat in my grandmother's kitchen, showing her the latest financial reports. Chen Global Hospitality had doubled in value, and Food Tech Solutions was now worth over $5 billion. Ah, but how's the broth? She asked, tasting the day's soup. I smiled, understanding her point. Success wasn't about the numbers, it was about staying true to yourself, your values, your heritage. The restaurant was packed as usual, with a line stretching around the block. Victoria had come by once, months ago, presumably to make amends. She waited in line like everyone else, ate quietly in a corner, and left a generous tip. She never returned, but the gesture was noted. Amanda had moved to Europe, unable to face the humiliation of working under my management team. Richard adapted surprisingly well, finally acknowledging that tradition needed to walk hand in hand with innovation. And James, last I heard, he was dating a socialite his mother approved of. Some people never learn. As for me, I split my time between running a global tech company and making noodles in my grandmother's kitchen. Both brought me joy in different ways, both were equally important parts of who I am. The media often asked about the contrast, a billionaire tech CEO who still works in a small restaurant kitchen. They didn't understand that the restaurant wasn't just a business, it was a reminder of where I came from, who I am, and what truly matters. One evening, as I was closing up the restaurant, a young girl peeked into the kitchen. "Are you really the lady who owns all those big hotels now?" I smiled, handing her a freshly made dumpling. "No, sweetheart. I'm just the lady who makes really good noodles. Everything else is just business." The Chen family thought they were teaching me a lesson about status and worth. Instead, they learned a costly lesson about judgment and pride. Sometimes the most valuable things in life come in the simplest packages, and the most powerful people are those who don't need to prove their power. As my grandmother always said, good food comes from the heart, not just the ingredients. The same is true of success. It comes from integrity, not just assets. I still have the takeout containers from that last dinner at the Chen mansion. They sit in my office as a reminder. Never let anyone shame you for who you are, and never compromise your values for those who can't see your worth. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't serving a cold dish, it's serving a perfectly prepared one. Seasoned with success, garnished with grace, and served with a side of karmic justice. The antiseptic smell of the hospital hit me as soon as I stepped off the elevator, bringing back memories I'd spent 2 decades trying to forget. The last time I'd been in a hospital, I was 18 and terrified, clutching my best friend's hand as I brought my daughter into the world. Alone. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I made my way down the corridor, following the room numbers until I reached 412. Through the window, I could see her, Eleanor Matthews, my mother, looking far smaller than I remembered in the hospital bed. "My name is Sarah Collins, and 20 years ago, my mother threw me out of our house for refusing to get an abortion. Now she needed me, and part of me wanted to walk away just like she had. But I'm not her. I never was." "Sarah?" A familiar voice made me turn. My younger sister Rebecca stood there, clutching a coffee cup, her perfectly highlighted hair and designer clothes a stark contrast to the sterile hospital surroundings. "You actually came." "You said it was urgent," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "That she's dying." Rebecca nodded, glancing through the window at our mother. "Her kidneys are failing. She needs a transplant," and she hesitated. "You're the only match in the family." Of course I was. Life had a twisted sense of humor that way. "Does she know I'm here?" "Yes." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. She's been asking for you, actually, ever since she found out about the match." "I bet she has," I thought bitterly. 20 years of silence, and now suddenly she wanted to talk, because she needed something from me. Again. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped into the room. The beeping of monitors filled the silence as my mother turned her head to look at me. Her hair, once a matching shade of dark brown to mine, was now completely gray. Her face, lined with age and illness, showed a flicker of something. Recognition? Regret? I couldn't tell. "Sarah," she said, her voice weaker than I remembered. "You came." I did. I remained standing near the door, maintaining my distance. "Rebecca said you needed to see me." She tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the movement. I know it's been a long time." 20 years, I said flatly. "Since the night you threw me out for ruining your perfect family image." The memory of that night floated back, sharp and clear despite the passing decades. I'd been terrified to tell her about the pregnancy, but I'd hoped foolishly that my mother would support me. Instead, she'd exploded. "No daughter of mine is going to be a teenage mother," she'd screamed, throwing my hastily packed bags onto the front lawn. "Either fix this mistake or don't come back at all. I'd chosen my baby, I'd never regretted that choice, not even during those first brutal months when I was sleeping on my best friend Jenny's couch, working 2 jobs while trying to finish high school online. Sarah, my mother's voice pulled me back to the present. I know I handled things badly. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Badly? You threw your pregnant teenage daughter out into the street. You didn't even ask if I was okay, if I needed help. You just erased me. I was trying to protect our family's reputation. No, I cut her off. You were protecting your reputation. Your standing in the community. Your perfect image as head of the PTA and church committee. It was always about you. She fell silent, her hands fidgeting with a hospital blanket. Rebecca, who'd followed me into the room, cleared her throat awkwardly. Sarah, please, she said softly. Mom needs a kidney. I finished for her. That's why I'm here, isn't it? Because suddenly you need something from the daughter you threw away. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Once, those tears would have devastated me, made me rush to apologize and make things right. But I wasn't that desperate to please teenager anymore. I made mistakes, she whispered. Terrible mistakes. But I'm your mother. Are you? I asked quietly, because a mother doesn't abandon her child when they need her most. A mother doesn't choose reputation over love. I thought about my own daughter, Emma, now 19 and thriving in her 2nd year of college. We'd had our struggles. Raising a child while barely more than a child myself wasn't easy, but I'd never made her feel unwanted, never made her feel like she had to earn my love. What do you want from me? My mother asked, her voice small. The truth, I said. For once in your life, tell me the truth. Not what you think people want to hear, not what maintains your image. The truth. She looked away, staring out the window at the gray October sky. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, she spoke. I was scared. I waited, saying nothing. When you told me you were pregnant, all I could think about was my own mother, how she'd been a teenage mother. How she'd struggled and suffered and died young, leaving me alone. Her hands twisted in the blanket. I was terrified you'd end up the same way. So you made sure I was alone yourself. The words came out sharper than I intended. I thought if I was harsh enough, you'd change your mind, choose a different path. She let out a shaky breath. By the time I realized what I'd done, how badly I'd failed you, it seemed too late. It wasn't too late, I said, my voice tight with suppressed emotion. You knew where I was. Jenny's parents took me in. Let me stay with them until I finished high school. You drove past their house every day on your way to work. You saw my car in their driveway. I know. A tear slid down her cheek. I saw you sometimes, getting bigger as the pregnancy progressed. I wanted to stop, to apologize, but your pride was more important. I finished for her. She didn't deny it. Rebecca, who'd been silent during this exchange, stepped forward. Sarah, please, whatever happened in the past. Mom needs help now. The doctors say without a transplant. I held up a hand to stop her. I know what happens without a transplant. I also know that agreeing to be a donor is a major decision, one that requires extensive physical and psychological evaluation. It's not something I can decide standing here in this hospital room. My mother's face fell, but she nodded slowly. I understand. I don't deserve your help. I know that. But would you at least tell me about my grandchild? Just once before. I studied her face, looking for any sign of manipulation, but all I saw was genuine longing and perhaps regret. Her name is Emma, I said finally. She's 19, studying environmental science at Berkeley. She's brilliant, compassionate, and stronger than I ever was. 19, my mother whispered. The same age I was when I had you. The irony wasn't lost on me. But unlike her, I'd made different choices when faced with a teenage daughter. I'd chosen love over judgment, support over rejection. I need time, I said, stepping back toward the door. Time to think about everything. About what you're asking. Of course, she said quickly. Whatever you need. Just, will you come back? Even if you decide not to. I paused at the door, thinking about Emma, about the lessons I'd taught her about forgiveness and compassion, about how sometimes the hardest choices aren't between right and wrong, but between different kinds of right. I'll come back, I said quietly, but not because you're my mother, because I'm not the kind of person who walks away when someone needs help, even if they once walked away from me. As I left the hospital, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. How did it go with Grandma? Are you okay? I smiled slightly, remembering her reaction when I told her about my mother's request. Unlike me at her age, Emma had grown up knowing she was loved unconditionally. It gave her the strength to be compassionate, even toward those who might not deserve it. I'm okay, I typed back. It's complicated. Can we talk tonight? Of course, Mom. Love you. 3 simple words that meant everything. 3 words my mother had never said to me after that night 20 years ago. I got into my car, but didn't start it immediately. Instead, I sat there, thinking about choices and consequences, about patterns repeating across generations, and about the power we have to break those patterns. My mother had chosen pride over love. I had chosen my daughter over everything else. Now I had another choice to make, and this time, lies hung in the balance. The next morning, I sat in my kitchen, staring at old photographs spread across the table. Jenny had dropped them off last night after hearing about my hospital visit, pictures she kept from those difficult early days after my mother threw me out. There I was, 17, and terrified, my baby bump just starting to show. Another of me studying for finals on Jenny's couch, textbooks balanced on my growing belly. The day Emma was born, my face exhausted but radiant as I held my daughter for the first time. My mother wasn't in any of them. She'd missed it all. My phone buzzed. Rebecca again. She'd been texting constantly since yesterday, alternating between guilt trips and pleas for understanding. Mom's numbers are getting worse. This one read. The doctors say we need to make a decision soon. I set the phone down without responding, picking up another photograph instead. This one was more recent. Emma's high school graduation. She stood between me and Jenny, all of us lacking at something off camera. My daughter had grown up surrounded by love, even if it wasn't the conventional family structure my mother had valued so highly. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. Through the window, I saw Jenny's familiar car in the driveway. I brought coffee and bagels, she announced as I opened the door. Figured you could use some moral support. 20 years later, and she was still taking care of me. Some friendships go beyond friendship, they become family. Have you decided? She asked, setting the food down and studying my face. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to walk away, to let her face the consequences of her choices like she made me face mine. Jenny nodded, understanding in her eyes. She'd been there through everything. The nights I cried myself to sleep, the struggle of juggling school and work while pregnant, the moment I finally held Emma in my arms. But, she prompted gently. But I keep thinking about Emma, I said softly. About how I've always taught her that forgiveness isn't about whether someone deserves it. It's about who we choose to be. And who do you choose to be, Sarah? That was the question, wasn't it? The one I've been wrestling with since leaving the hospital yesterday. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Rebecca. It was Dr. Martinez, the transplant coordinator I'd spoken with last night. Ms. Collins, we've reviewed your mother's case. If you're interested in being evaluated as a donor, we should start the process soon. Her condition is deteriorating rapidly. I closed my eyes, thinking about choices and consequences. About the night my mother had thrown me out, and all the nights after when I promised myself I'd never be that kind of parent. I'll do the evaluation, I heard myself say. But I have conditions. An hour later, I walked back into my mother's hospital room. She looked worse than yesterday, her skin taking on a yellowish tinge that spoke of advancing kidney failure. Sarah, she breathed, hope flickering across her face. You came back. I did, I said, sitting in the chair beside her bed. And I've agreed to be evaluated as a donor. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, I'm not finished, I cut her off firmly. I have conditions. First, if I'm approved as a donor, you need to go to therapy. Real therapy, not just the church counseling you believe in. You need to deal with your own trauma about your mother instead of passing it on. She flinched but nodded. Second, I continued, if you want a relationship with Emma, and that's her choice, not yours or mine, you accept her exactly as she is. No judgment, no attempts to mold her into your idea of perfect. Of course, she whispered, anything. And finally, I met her eyes steadily. You need to understand that this doesn't fix everything. A kidney doesn't erase 20 years of absence. If you want to be part of our lives, you have to earn it. Every day. Can you do that? She was quiet for a long moment, really looking at me perhaps for the first time since I'd returned. You're not the same girl I threw out, she said finally. No, I agreed. I'm not. That girl died the night you chose your reputation over your daughter. The woman I am now, she's stronger, wiser, and a much better mother than you ever were. Harsh words, maybe, but true ones. Sometimes healing can only begin with truth. I'd like to try, she said softly, to be better, to do better, if you'll give me the chance. The next few weeks were a blur of medical tests, psychological evaluations, and endless paperwork. Emma came home from college to support me through the process, her presence a constant reminder of why I was doing this. You're amazing, Mom, she told me one night as we sat on the porch swing. I don't know if I could be this forgiving. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, remembering how tiny she'd once been. You could be. Because I raised you to be stronger than hate, bigger than bitterness. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't holding onto anger, it's letting it go. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday in November. As they wheeled me into the operating room, I thought about cycles and how we choose to break them. My grandmother had been a teenage mother who died young, leaving my mother alone and traumatized. My mother had responded to my pregnancy by choosing abandonment over support. But I had chosen differently. I had chosen to keep my baby, to build a life filled with love instead of judgment. And now I was choosing to give my mother a second chance, not because she deserved it, but because I refused to let her mistakes define who I was. 3 months after the successful transplant, we sat in my therapist's office, part of the healing process we'd both committed to. It wasn't easy. 20 years of pain and resentment don't disappear with a surgery or a few apologies. I look at Emma, my mother said during one session, and I see everything I should have done differently. She's so confident, so secure in your love. I robbed you of that security, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Yes, I agreed, you will. But regret can either paralyze us or motivate us to do better. The choice is yours. She was trying. She attended therapy faithfully, worked to understand her own trauma responses, and never once tried to force a relationship with Emma. She waited, patient and humble, until Emma decided she was ready to know her grandmother. A year after the surgery, we celebrated Emma's 20th birthday. 4 generations of women sat around my dining room table, my mother, me, Emma, and Jenny, who was as much family as any of us. The conversation wasn't always easy, and there were moments when old tensions surfaced. But as I watched my mother tentatively sharing stories with Emma, saw the genuine interest in her eyes as Emma talked about her environmental science projects, I realized something important. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't protecting our children from pain. It's showing them how to heal from it. I had given my mother more than a kidney. I had given her a chance to break her own cycle of trauma and fear. Whether she took that chance was up to her, but I knew I had made the right choice. Not because she deserved it, not because it erased the past, but because I had chosen to be the kind of person who helps others heal, even if they once caused me pain. That night, after everyone had gone home, Emma helped me clean up the kitchen. You know what I admire most about you, Mom? She said suddenly. My excellent taste in birthday cakes? I teased. She smiled but shook her head. No, the way you taught me that strength isn't about not getting hurt. It's about what you choose to do with the hurt. You could have let what Grandma did make you bitter, make you hard. Instead, you chose to be better. I pulled her into a hug, thinking about choices and consequences, about cycles broken and new patterns formed. That's the thing about choices, baby, I whispered into her hair. They show us who we really are. And sometimes they give us the chance to help others become who they could be. My mother and I will never have the relationship we might have had if she'd made different choices 20 years ago. That possibility died the night she threw me out. But we're building something new, something based on truth and accountability rather than appearance and pride. It's not perfect. It's not always easy. But it's real, and sometimes that's enough. Because in the end, life isn't about the family you're born into. It's about the family you choose to build, the love you choose to give, and the person you choose to become. I chose to be more than my mother's mistakes. I chose to give more than I was given. I chose love over bitterness, healing over hate. And in making those choices, I gave my daughter something my mother never gave me. The knowledge that love doesn't have to be earned. That family should be a safe harbor rather than a storm to weather. And that sometimes the strongest thing we can do is choose forgiveness, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Gone. Every last recipe. Patricia's voice dripped with satisfaction through my phone's speaker. The website, the photos, Those ridiculous video tutorials, all of it. Maybe now you'll remember what's really important in life. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. And what would that be, Patricia? Family, of course. My son needs a proper wife, not some wannabe internet chef. Honestly, Sarah, 5 years of marriage and not even trying for children, it's shameful. My name is Sarah Chen Roberts, and I had spent the last 5 years building the Fusion Kitchen into one of the most successful Asian American food blogs in the country. What had started as a way to preserve my grandmother's recipes had grown into a thriving business with over 2 million monthly readers. And my mother-in-law had just broken into my home office to delete it all. Or so she thought. Well, I said calmly, watching the security camera footage on my laptop, I appreciate you letting me know. That's it. Patricia sounded disappointed. No crying? No begging? I expected more drama from you, Sarah. Sorry to disappoint. I need to go now, client meeting. I ended the call and took a deep breath, reminding myself that everything important was safely backed up in multiple locations. But that wasn't what made me smile. It was the crystal clear video playing on my screen. Patricia, using a key she wasn't supposed to have, sneaking into my office at 2:47 p.m. Patricia, methodically deleting files from my computer for over an hour. Patricia, making a phone call, which my system had also recorded, to someone named Marcus about taking care of the cloud problem. James, my husband, was away at a medical conference, which was probably why she'd chosen today to strike. He'd always tried to play peacekeeper between us, making excuses for his mother's behavior. She's just old-fashioned, he'd say. She doesn't understand modern marriages. But this was different. This was my career, my passion, my livelihood. I picked up my phone again and called my best friend, May. You're not going to believe what your favorite mother-in-law just did, I said when she answered. Oh God, what now? Did she reorganize your kitchen again? Replace all your spices with proper American ones? She broke into my office and deleted my entire blog. There was a moment of silence then. She did wait. I explained everything. The break-in, the deletion, the smug phone call. But here's the thing, I added. I've got it all on video. And that call she made, it wasn't just about deleting my work. She's planning something bigger. Please tell me you're going to destroy her, May said, and I could hear the grin in her voice. Not yet. First, I need to figure out what she's really up to. The blog deletion seems like just the beginning. After hanging up with May, I started digging deeper into the security footage. Patricia had spent a suspicious amount of time going through my filing cabinet, photographing documents with her phone. She'd also plugged something into my computer, a USB drive that she carefully removed and pocketed before leaving. I pulled up the backup log on my encrypted cloud storage. Everything was there. Recipes, photos, videos, user comments, everything she thought she'd destroyed. But there was something else. An unauthorized access attempt from an IP address I didn't recognize, timestamped just minutes after Patricia left my office. Someone had tried to hack my cloud storage. Someone with professional skills. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Dinner on Sunday. No excuses this time. We need to discuss your priorities. I thought about declining, but curiosity won out. What was she planning? And who was this Marcus person she called? Looking forward to it, I texted back. The next morning, I met with Nina, my web security consultant, in a quiet coffee shop downtown. Someone tried to brute force your accounts, she confirmed, examining the logs on her laptop. Pretty sophisticated attempt too, not your average hacker. Can you trace it? Nina nodded, typing rapidly. The attack came from a company called Cyber Shield Solutions. They're a legitimate security firm, but they've been known to take less legitimate side jobs. Any way to find out who hired them? Give me a few days. But Sarah, she looked up from her screen, be careful. This feels bigger than just deleting a food blog. She was right. Patricia had always disapproved of my career, but this level of aggression was new. Breaking and entering, hiring hackers, what was driving her? I spent the next few days pretending everything was normal. I answered client emails, worked on new recipes, and acted like my entire website hadn't just been attacked. The backed-up version was running smoothly on a new server. But I kept that quiet. Let Patricia think she'd won. On Sunday evening, I pulled up to her sprawling suburban home, noting the unfamiliar black SUV in the driveway. James had texted to say his conference was running long. He wouldn't be back until tomorrow. Convenient. Patricia opened the door wearing her usual forced smile. "Sarah, darling, come in. We have a guest I'd like you to meet." The man sitting in her living room stood as I entered. Tall, expensive suit, the kind of smooth confidence that set off immediate alarm bells. "Marcus Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm a family lawyer. Patricia's been telling me about your situation." I kept my face neutral as I shook his hand. So this was Marcus, the man from the phone call. What situation would that be? I asked, taking a seat. Patricia bustled in with a tea tray, her voice syrupy sweet. "We're worried about you, dear. All this time spent on that silly website, neglecting your real responsibilities. Marcus here specializes in marriage counseling and family planning." "How thoughtful," I said, accepting a cup of tea. "And what exactly does that mean?" Marcus leaned forward, all business. "Mrs. Chen Roberts, your mother-in-law has expressed concerns about the direction of your marriage. She believes your online activities have become an obstacle to starting a family. We'd like to discuss options for refocusing your priorities." I took a sip of tea, studying them both. Patricia looked triumphant, Marcus professional, but with an undercurrent of something else. "Threat? Warning? Options?" I prompted. "Yes," Marcus continued. "We've prepared some documents, a new prenuptial agreement, actually, one that would ensure your full commitment to family life." Patricia practically glowed. "It's for the best, dear. James agrees. He's already reviewed the papers." That was a lie. I knew my husband well enough to know he'd never agree to something like this without talking to me first. But I kept my expression curious, interested. "May I see these documents?" Marcus produced a thick folder from his briefcase. As I flipped through the pages, my suspicions were confirmed. This wasn't just about my blog or having children. This was a complete takeover of my life. The new agreement would require me to shut down my business entirely. Any income I earned would go into a trust controlled by Patricia. I would need her approval for any major decisions, from where we lived to how we spent our money. "This is quite thorough," I said mildly. "When would you need my signature?" "Tonight, ideally," Marcus replied. "We'd like to file first thing tomorrow." I closed the folder and set it on the coffee table. "And if I refuse?" Patricia's smile turned cold. "Then we'd have to explore other options. James's position at the hospital is quite dependent on his mother's influence on the board. And of course, there's the matter of your permanent resident status." Ah, there it was. The real threat. Patricia had always held my immigrant status over my head. Even though I became a citizen years ago, she'd never bothered to learn the difference. "I see," I said, standing up. "Well, this has been enlightening. I'll need time to review everything with my home lawyer." "That won't be necessary," Marcus started, but I was already heading for the door. "I'll be in touch," I called over my shoulder. "Thank you for the tea." Back in my car, I pulled out my phone and started recording. Note to self. Sunday, October 15th, 7:45 p.m. Patricia Roberts and Marcus Thompson attempted to coerce me into signing a new prenuptial agreement under threat of interfering with my husband's career and my immigration status. Full security footage of break-in and website deletion attempt available. Sending copies to secure storage now. I had a feeling I was going to need all the evidence I could get. The next morning, I walked into the offices of Wong and Associates, a law firm specializing in both business and family law. Grace Wong, my friend since college, had dropped everything to meet with me when I called last night. "Let me get this straight," she said, reviewing the security footage on her laptop. "Your mother-in-law broke into your house, tried to destroy your business, hired hackers to attack your backup servers, and then attempted to blackmail you into signing away your rights. Don't forget threatening my husband's career and making vague implications about my immigration status." I added, pulling out the documents from last night. "Here's what they wanted me to sign." Grace read through the papers, her expression darkening with each page. Sarah, this is insane. These terms aren't just restrictive. They're practically indentured servitude. And completely unenforceable, by the way." I figured. But what I don't understand is why now. Patricia's always been controlling, but this level of aggression seems extreme. Grace typed something into her computer. "Let me look into something. That lawyer, Marcus Thompson. His name sounds familiar." While she searched, I checked my phone. Still no response from James to my messages about coming home early. But there was an email from Nina, my security consultant. Found the money trail. CyberShield Solutions was paid through a shell company owned by Robert's Family Holdings. But here's where it gets interesting. They weren't just hired to attack your blog. They've been monitoring all your communications for months. Call me ASAP. Sarah, Grace's voice pulled me back. You need to see this. She turned her monitor around. On the screen was a news article from 3 years ago. Local attorney disbarred for fraudulent estate planning scheme. The photos show a younger Marcus Thompson being led out of a courthouse in handcuffs. He lost his license for helping wealthy families hide assets from the government, Grace explained. Now he works as a consultant for people looking to circumvent the law. If he's involved. This is about more than just my blog or having babies, I finished. But what's the endgame? Grace pulled up another document. Your company's financials. The Fusion Kitchen is worth what now? Last valuation was around $3.5 million. The cookbook deal I signed last month should push it over $4 million by year's end. And your husband is the sole heir to the Roberts family fortune. I nodded. Patricia's late husband left everything in trust for James. She manages it until he turns 40 or has children of his own. Grace sat back, realization dawning. That's in 6 months, isn't it? When James turns 40. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Patricia's escalating behavior, the urgent push for grandchildren, the attempt to seize control of my assets. She's trying to maintain control of the money, I said. If James has children, he gets the trust. But if they can force me out of the picture, he might marry someone more amenable to Patricia's influence, Grace finished. Someone who would let her keep controlling everything. I thought about all the suitable young women Patricia was always trying to introduce James to at church functions. The not-so-subtle hints about divorce rates in mixed marriages. She wants me gone before James's birthday, I said. That's why they're moving so fast. Grace was already pulling out legal forms. We need to move faster. First, we document everything. The break-in, the hacking attempt, last night's coercion attempt. Then we go after them for criminal charges. No, I said, an idea forming. Not yet. I have a better plan. Over the next week, I set my plan in motion. First, I had Nina install additional security measures and monitoring software. If Patricia tried to access anything of mine again, we'd know immediately. Then I started posting on my blog again, using the backup site Patricia didn't know about. But instead of my usual recipes, I began sharing stories. Stories about my grandmother's journey to America, about preserving cultural heritage through food, about building businesses and following dreams. The posts went viral. Your traffic has tripled, Nina reported during our daily check-in. And guess who's spending hours reading every post and comment? Patricia. Through multiple devices, she's practically stalking your site, probably trying to figure out how it's still running. Perfect. Meanwhile, Grace helped me prepare the legal groundwork. We documented everything but held off on filing anything. The timing had to be right. James finally came home from his conference, exhausted and distracted. He mentioned his mother had called him about concerns regarding our marriage. She thinks you're unhappy, he said cautiously over dinner. Something about your blog taking too much time. I reached across the table and took his hand. Honey, we need to talk about your mother. And about the trust. His face fell. She told you about that? Not exactly. But I know she's worried about losing control when you turn 40. That's what this is really about. Sarah, he hesitated. I know she can be difficult, but she's just looking out for me. For us. Is that why she broke into our house and tried to destroy my business? His head snapped up. What? I pulled out my laptop and showed him everything. The security footage, the hacking attempts, the illegal contract, all of it. With each revelation, his face grew darker. I had no idea, he whispered. The prenup she mentioned, she said it was your idea, to protect your business. She lied, James. She's been lying about a lot of things. He was quiet for a long moment. What do you want to do? I told him my plan. By the end, he was nodding slowly. Do it, he said. All of it. The next Sunday, we arrived at Patricia's house for the weekly family dinner. This time, I brought my laptop. Sarah, Patricia greeted me with her usual false warmth. I hope you've had time to think about our discussion. Oh, I have, I said brightly. In fact, I've been doing a lot of research about family, about legacy, about fraud. Her smile flickered. Marcus Thompson, sitting in his usual spot, shifted uncomfortably. I don't know what you mean, Patricia said. I opened my laptop and connected it to her large TV screen. Let me show you. For the next 20 minutes, I played everything. The security footage of her break-in, audio of her call with Marcus, documentation of the hacking attempts, financial records showing her mismanagement of the family trust. That's enough. Marcus started to stand, but James cut him off. No, it's not, he said quietly. Keep going, Sarah. I pulled up the final document, a formal audit of the Roberts family trust, showing years of unauthorized withdrawals and questionable investments. You've been embezzling from your own son, I said to Patricia, using his inheritance to fund your lifestyle while trying to prevent him from taking control. That's why you're so desperate to get rid of me. A new wife might let you keep stealing, but you know I won't. Patricia's face had gone chalk white. James, she pleaded, you can't believe these lies. I'm your mother. A mother who tried to destroy my wife's career, James replied. Who hired a disbarred lawyer to threaten her? Who's been stealing from me for years? Everything I did was for you. No, I cut in. Everything you did was for control. But that's over now. I pressed a button on my laptop, and emails started flying out, to the hospital board, to the family lawyers, to the SEC investigators who'd been waiting for evidence of Patricia's financial crimes. You can't do this, Marcus sputtered. You have no right. Actually, Grace said, walking in from the kitchen where she'd been waiting, she has every right. And as the trustees' counsel, I'm obligated to report financial malfeasance when I find it. Within hours, Patricia's carefully constructed world began to crumble. The hospital board suspended her voting rights pending investigation. The family lawyers initiated emergency proceedings to freeze the trust's assets, and Marcus Thompson was taken into custody for practicing law without a license. But the real satisfaction came 3 months later when the Fusion Kitchen published my first cookbook. On the dedication page was a simple message. For my grandmother, who taught me that food is love. For my husband, who taught me that love is support. And for my mother-in-law, who taught me that the strongest recipes are the ones that survive attempts to destroy them. The book became a bestseller. Patricia, under house arrest while awaiting trial for financial fraud, had plenty of time to read the reviews. James took control of his trust early, given the circumstances. One of his first acts was to establish a foundation supporting immigrant entrepreneurs. I still run my blog, now expanded into a multimedia company celebrating cultural fusion through food. Last week, I received a letter from Patricia's lawyer. She wants to meet, to apologize. I haven't decided if I'll go. Some recipes, after all, are better left unchanged. But I did send her a copy of my cookbook. After all, she'd always said family was the most important thing. And now, thanks to her, millions of readers know exactly how I feel about that. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But in my experience, it's best served with a side of justice and a garnish of success. And I've always been good with recipes. I grew up enchanted by the magic my grandmother created in her tiny kitchen. Each morning, the warm, comforting aroma of freshly baked bread and pastries would weave through our modest apartment, drawing neighbors like moths to a flame. Her hands, weathered yet masterful, could transform the simplest ingredients into creations that brought joy to everyone lucky enough to taste them. Remember this, Emma, she'd often say, kneading dough with rhythmic precision. Good food isn't just about taste. It's about creating memories. Her words stayed with me long after she passed away, leaving behind a well-loved recipe book filled with her handwritten notes and secrets. I was 16 at the time, but I knew then what I wanted my life to be. 10 years later, I had graduated from culinary school and spent countless hours honing my craft in various bakeries. Every paycheck went straight into my dream fund, inching me closer to opening my own bakery. The journey wasn't easy. Double shifts left my feet aching, my hands raw. But I never wavered. I had a vision. That's when I met James. It was a rainy Tuesday morning, and he walked into the bakery where I worked, seeking refuge from the downpour. His damp suit and askew tie gave him a disheveled charm. But it was his smile that lit up the room. "Whatever smells so good, I'll take 2, he said, running a hand through his wet hair. I had just pulled my signature lavender honey croissants from the oven. You're in luck, I said, placing one on a plate. First one's on the house. He took a bite, his eyes widening in delight. This is amazing. Please tell me you're not married. I laughed at his boldness. Is that your way of asking me out? Only if it's working, he replied with a grin. It was. James was unlike anyone I'd ever met, kind, supportive, and genuinely interested in my dreams. When I told him about my plans to open my own bakery, he didn't dismiss them as far-fetched like others had. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions and offered encouragement. Our relationship blossomed quickly. 6 months later, we were discussing marriage. That's when I met his family, and everything changed. Patricia Chen, James's mother, was the embodiment of old money and high society. Her perfectly styled hair, designer wardrobe, and air of superiority made me feel out of place from the start. As the property manager of Crystal Mall, one of the city's most prestigious shopping centers, she wielded her status like a weapon. So, she began during our first dinner together, sipping her wine. You're a baker? Yes, I said eagerly, determined not to let her rattle me. I've been saving to open my own bakery. She laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the room. Oh, darling. Do you know how many small businesses fail in their first year, especially now? James, surely you can help her find something more realistic? James squeezed my hand under the table. Mom, Emma is incredibly talented. She knows what she's doing. Of course she does, Patricia replied, her smile dripping with condescension. But wouldn't you rather have a wife who can attend charity galas and board meetings? Someone who fits our world? Her words stung, but I didn't respond. James's father, Robert, quickly changed the subject. A tactic I later learned was his go-to for avoiding confrontation. Despite Patricia's disdain, James and I married 6 months later in a small ceremony. It was far from the grand affair Patricia had envisioned, and she made her disappointment known at every turn. At the same time, I was quietly working toward my bakery dream. A chance meeting with Marcus Sterling, a prominent real estate developer, changed everything. Impressed with my business plan and vision, Marcus offered to invest in my bakery, providing the capital to launch not just a small shop, but a high-end bakery and cafe concept with room to grow. What neither James nor Patricia knew was that Marcus owned Crystal Mall, where Patricia worked. When my application for a space crossed her desk, she dismissed it out of hand. A bakery? Here, she scoffed. This is a luxury mall, not some roadside stand. What she didn't know was that Marcus had already approved my tenancy. Her rejection was merely a formality. 2 weeks later, construction began on Sweet Heritage in the heart of Crystal Mall. Patricia's fury was palpable when she discovered her veto had been overruled, but there was nothing she could do. On the eve of the grand opening, she stopped by, her expression a mix of disdain and smugness. When this fails, and it will fail, don't expect James to pick up the pieces, she said, her tone cold. I smiled, holding back the truth. Thank you for your concern, Patricia. Care for a coffee? We're testing the machines. The next morning, Sweet Heritage opened its doors to a crowd of eager customers. The scent of fresh pastries filled the air, and the elegant decor showcased the perfect blend of tradition and modernity. By noon, we had sold out, and glowing reviews from food critics began pouring in. Patricia's disapproval was no match for the bakery's success. But as she stormed off that morning, unaware of Marcus's involvement, I couldn't help but feel a small victory. This wasn't just about proving her wrong, it was about proving myself right. And as I stood in my dream space, my grandmother's worn recipe book tucked into my apron pocket, I knew this was only the beginning. The situation reached a boiling point at the mall's monthly tenant meeting. Patricia had scheduled it during our busiest morning hours, forcing me to choose between overseeing the breakfast rush or attending. Reluctantly, I sent Sarah to manage the shop and went to the meeting. As you can see from these charts, Patricia was saying as I slipped into a seat, foot traffic in the north wing has become problematic. Certain establishments, she paused, her eyes locking on me, air causing congestion that disrupts our more established tenants. The boutique owner next door spoke up immediately. Actually, since Sweet Heritage opened, our sales are up 30%. Their customers shop while they wait for their orders. A ripple of agreement ran through the room. Patricia's face tightened. Well, she tried again. There have been complaints about odors. You mean the smell of fresh bread? Someone interrupted with a chuckle. It's fantastic. My customers say it makes the whole mall feel cozier. And what about Patricia? Marcus's calm but firm voice cut her off. Sitting at the back, the mall's owner had been silently observing. I think we've heard enough. Sweet Heritage has exceeded expectations and boosted mall traffic. Perhaps we should focus on more pressing concerns. Patricia sat down abruptly, her lips pressed thin. After the meeting, she cornered me in the hallway. I don't know how you fooled everyone, she hissed, but this won't last. You're not good enough for this mall, or for my son. Mom, James's voice startled her. He'd arrived to meet me for lunch. Patricia immediately softened. James, darling. I was just expressing concern about the stress Emma must be under, running a business like this. Surely you prefer her to have more time for family. The only stress I feel, I said evenly, comes from your constant interference. How dare you? Patricia snapped. I'm only thinking of my son's happiness. No, James interjected, his tone sharp. You're thinking of yourself. Emma has built something incredible. Why can't you just support her? Patricia's eyes glistened with well-timed tears. I see she's turned you against me. What kind of woman drives a wedge between a mother and her son? The kind who's transforming your entire mall, Marcus said, approaching. Patricia, my office. Now. We watched them walk away. James shook his head. I'm so sorry, Emma. I didn't know she was being this awful. It's not your fault, I said, though a part of me wished he'd seen it sooner. Before I could say more, Sarah rushed up, breathless. Emma, the food critic's review is live. The review was everything we'd hoped for, glowing praise for our innovative recipes, warm atmosphere, and excellent service. By evening, our shop was busier than ever, with new customers and even a few well-known food bloggers. Patricia didn't show up at the mall for several days. Gossip hinted at lengthy meetings with Marcus. I kept quiet, waiting for the right moment. That moment came Sunday evening at a family dinner Patricia insisted on hosting. To discuss some changes, she said cryptically. The meal was tense. Patricia picked at her food while Robert made awkward small talk. Finally, she cleared her throat. There have been developments at work, she began. James frowned. What's going on? Mr. Sterling is making organizational changes, she said, her voice tight. He's bringing in a new property manager, someone with fresh perspectives. What? James exclaimed. But you've managed Crystal Mall for years. Apparently, Patricia said bitterly, someone has convinced him otherwise. Someone, saw potential for something better, I said softly. All eyes turned to me. What do you mean? Robert asked. I took a steadying breath. Before I opened Sweet Heritage, I met Marcus at a seminar. He saw potential in my ideas, not just for a bakery, but for modernizing retail spaces. Patricia let out a sharp laugh. You? A baker with grand ideas? Yes, I said, sliding a folder across the table. These are proposals I've worked on with Marcus for over a year. Ideas for transforming Crystal Mall into a modern destination. James opened the folder, his eyes widening. Community spaces, seasonal festivals. Emma, this is amazing. Ridiculous, Patricia scoffed. Marcus would never. I already have, Marcus said, stepping into the room. Patricia's face drained of color. Mr. Sterling. I didn't. Emma owns 51% of Sterling Retail Properties Mall division, including Crystal Mall, Marcus announced. The room erupted. Patricia looked stunned. Robert choked on his wine. It's impossible. Patricia sputtered. Emma has raised mall revenues by 40% in 1 year, Marcus said. Her strategies are reshaping retail. Patricia whispered. Are you taking my job? No, I said firmly. You're being promoted. Regional Operations Director for our expansion. Assuming, I added, you can work professionally with me. Patricia's shock slowly gave way to grudging acceptance. I may have misjudged you. You definitely did, I replied. The question is, what will you do now? As we left, James squeezed my hand. I should have stood up for you sooner. Yes, I said, smiling. But what matters is what comes next. As we drove home, a quiet reflection settled over me. Patricia had been humbled, but questions lingered in my mind. Could her newfound acceptance of me endure beyond the reach of circumstance? Would it mean more or less, because it had been spurred by necessity rather than genuine change? The next day heralded fresh challenges. news of the management shifts swept through the mall, transforming my daily interactions. Some employees greeted me with respect, others with nervous glances that hinted at their fears about the future. Yet beneath the surface, there was a growing energy, the buzz of something new and promising taking shape. Patricia, meanwhile, had taken a week to process the upheaval. When she returned, it was with a surprising fervor for the new initiatives, though her motivation seemed more about proving herself to Marcus than embracing the vision. Still, it was progress. 3 weeks later, she appeared at Sweet Heritage before dawn. Her usually immaculate posture was softened by uncertainty, and her designer handbag seemed more like a shield than an accessory. "We need to talk," she said simply. I was wrist-deep in croissant dough but gestured toward my office. 5 minutes. She waited silently, observing as I finished the delicate laminating process. By the time we sat across from each other, the tension had thickened. Her eyes wandered over the shelves in my office, pausing on my grandmother's recipe book. I'd been reviewing the expansion plans, she began, her tone uncharacteristically measured. "The demographic data for the suburban locations is impressive." I nodded. "Thank you." I stayed silent, waiting for her to say what she had really come to say. Her fingers worried at the pearls around her neck. Finally, she spoke, her voice wavering. "I owe you an apology." I didn't respond immediately. I wanted to hear her out. "When James introduced you to us, I was prejudiced. I saw someone I believed didn't belong. Someone I thought would hold my son back. I couldn't have been more wrong." Her candor caught me off guard, but I simply asked, "And now?" "Now, I see someone with vision and character. Someone who took every opportunity to retaliate against me and chose grace instead. You've built something extraordinary, and I misjudged you completely." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "And what changed your mind?" "You did," she said softly. "Your actions, your resilience. And this place, it's more than a bakery, isn't it? It's a living, breathing example of what retail can become." "That's the idea," I replied. "Retail isn't just about transactions anymore. It's about creating connections and experiences, about telling stories." Her gaze drifted to the recipe book again. "The morning buns," she said, almost to herself. "Yes. They remind me of the ones my grandmother used to make. I lost her recipe years ago." I stood and retrieved the book from the shelf. "Would you like to see how they're made?" Her eyes widened, tears gathering at the corners. "You'd share that with me." "Family recipes are meant to be shared," I said. "If we're going to make this work, we need to start there." That morning, Patricia Chen donned an apron in the Sweet Heritage kitchen for the first time. Her initial attempts at morning buns were far from perfect, uneven filling, lopsided shapes. But when she bit into her first creation, her smile was unguarded and genuine. Over the weeks that followed, Patricia's early morning baking sessions became a regular sight. The tenants, initially shocked, began to embrace the idea. Our professional relationship grew, and so slowly did our personal one. Months later, at the grand opening of Sweet Heritage's second location, Patricia was teaching her friends from the country club how to make croissants. Marcus, watching the scene, nudged me with a grin. "Never thought I'd see the day." "Neither did I replied honestly. The expansion flourished, with 5 new locations opening within a year. Each one reflected the heart of the original Sweet Heritage while embracing Patricia's operational expertise. The morning buns, now a signature item, became the subject of endless speculation among food bloggers. One evening, as we closed the flagship store, Patricia lingered. "Emma, I've been thinking about your community initiative," she said. "Oh, what if we expanded it? Cooking classes, maybe, teaching people how to create their own family traditions." I smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea." Her hug was unexpected but warm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on me." As I drove home, I reflected on how life's sweetest triumphs often lie in the connections we forge. Success wasn't just about building a thriving business or proving others wrong. It was about honoring my grandmother's legacy and helping others, even those who resisted, grow. The next morning, Patricia was already at Sweet Heritage when I arrived. "I was thinking," she said, her apron dusted with flour. "Maybe we could create a special pastry for James and your anniversary, something that tells your story." "Our story," I corrected gently, "the bitter and the sweet." She smiled, understanding. "Yes, all of it." As we worked side by side in the warm glow of the rising sun, The scent of fresh possibilities filled the air. It wasn't just a new beginning for the bakery or the mall. It was a new beginning for us all.
"Enough, Susan," my mom shouted, her voice quivering with frustration as she leaned forward, her glare cutting through the tension like a blade. The ornaments on the Christmas tree sparkled faintly under the dim glow of the living room lights, but the festive warmth felt cruelly hollow. I sat frozen, my hands gripping my lap, trying to quell the anger rising inside me. "You always have to make everything about you," my dad added, his tone sharp enough to sting. The words hit harder than I expected, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. My name is Susan Blanchard. I was 32 years old then, and this was Christmas Eve in the late 1970s, a time when families like ours in rural Illinois depended on one another. Our family farm, passed down for generations, was struggling to stay afloat. Years earlier, I'd moved to Chicago to become a lawyer, a choice my parents still saw as a betrayal of our roots. Meanwhile, my older brother Jake stayed behind, running the farm and basking in the glow of our parents' constant praise. I didn't resent him for staying, it was how they treated me that stung. No matter what I did, I was always the outsider. Since summer, I'd quietly sent money to the farm's shared account, hoping to help with the mounting bills Jake had mentioned. He'd asked me to keep it between us, insisting it would hurt our parents' pride if they knew. At the time, it made sense. I trusted Jake to handle it, but now, sitting at the table, listening to our parents heap praise on him for sacrificing so much to save the farm, I felt a deep sense of betrayal. "Jake's the reason we've been able to keep things going," my mom said, her voice thick with pride. "I don't know what we'd do without him." I looked across the room at Jake, expecting some sign of acknowledgement or guilt. Instead, he leaned back in his chair with a smirk, clearly enjoying the spectacle. That was the breaking point. "Actually," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough to pierce the chatter, "I'm the one who's been sending money, every month since July." My dad scoffed, shaking his head as if I'd just said something absurd. "Don't start making things up, Susan. Jake's been here day in and day out, working his tail off for this family. Why would you even say something like that?" The dismissive tone stung more than the words. My mom crossed her arms, her expression cold. "Honestly, Susan, it's Christmas. Can we not ruin the evening with your need for attention?" Anger and humiliation surged through me. "I'm not making it up," I said firmly. "I've been depositing money at the Chicago branch of the bank directly into the farm account. Every single deposit came from me." But they weren't listening. My dad waved me off with an exasperated sigh, and my mom turned to Jake, who shrugged, feigning ignorance. The frustration was unbearable. "Are you really going to sit there and lie, Jake?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "You know I've been making those deposits." Jake didn't flinch. He leaned back, his smirk widening. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Susan," he said, his tone dripping with false innocence. My blood boiled. "Unbelievable," I muttered, shaking my head, but our parents didn't seem to care. My dad sighed heavily, as if I were the one ruining the evening, while my mom cast Jake a sympathetic glance, as though he were the victim. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor, and locked eyes with Jake. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Those deposits weren't small. You've been letting our parents believe you're some kind of hero when all you've done is lie. If you don't admit it now, I'll leave first thing tomorrow," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions roiling inside. "I'll go back to Chicago and get the proof myself." Jake shrugged, leaning back in his chair with infuriating nonchalance. "You're wasting your time, Susan," he said with a chuckle. "Whatever story you've cooked up in your head, go ahead and prove it." In that moment, I realized Jake didn't think I'd actually follow through. To him, this was just another family argument that would fizzle out, one where I'd eventually back down, letting him win like always. His smirk said it all. He thought I was too afraid of the fallout to take action. But that smirk only fueled my determination. I wasn't going to let him get away with this, not this time. He'd lied, taken advantage of me, and soaked up our parents' praise while treating my contributions like they didn't exist. I wasn't staying silent. The next morning, I packed my bags, unable to endure another moment in that house. When I told my parents I was leaving, my mom sighed, her voice heavy with disapproval. "It's Christmas, Susan," she said, as if I were the one ruining everything. My dad didn't even look up from his coffee. "Can't go a single holiday without causing a scene," he muttered. Jake, of course, barely hid his grin, lounging smugly in his chair as though he'd already won. I didn't respond. I wasn't staying, not with everyone acting like I was the problem. I knew the banks were closed, but I didn't care. I needed to get out of there, away from their judgment and his lies. The drive back to Chicago felt endless. The roads were eerily quiet, most people home celebrating with their families. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, the cold winter air seeping into the car, despite the heater working overtime. My thoughts churned, replaying the events of the night before. Jake didn't believe I'd actually do it. He probably thought I'd stew in silence, too intimidated by our parents' blind faith in him to act. But this time was different. I was done being dismissed, done letting him walk all over me. As I passed snow-covered fields and frozen lakes, one thing became certain: I would get the proof, and I would make sure everyone knew the truth. A few days later, when the banks reopened, I went straight to the Chicago branch. The morning was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that stung your skin and made every breath sharp. I stepped inside, the warmth of the bank a welcome relief, and approached the counter. "Good morning," the teller greeted me with a polite smile. "How can I help you today?" I explained, my tone firm but measured, that I needed copies of every deposit I had made to the Blanchard farm account since July. The teller nodded and disappeared into the back. He returned with a thick ledger and a small machine that began printing receipts. One by one, the records emerged, each with my name, the dates, and the amounts clearly listed. When he handed me the stack of receipts, his smile was polite but curious. "Here you go, ma'am. Let us know if there's anything else you need." "Thank you," I said, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the papers. They weren't just receipts, they were proof, undeniable evidence of Jake's lies. With the stack in hand, I headed back to my car. The roads were still slick from the recent snowstorm, but I didn't care. I needed to get back to the farm. The receipts sat on the passenger seat, neatly stacked and secured under a small paperweight I'd grabbed from my desk. Every time I glanced at them, my anger reignited. Jake really thought he could get away with this, and worse, that our parents had so readily taken his side. The drive back felt longer this time, the farm seeming farther away with every mile. As I passed through quiet towns and frozen landscapes, my mind raced, replaying every dismissive comment, every smug grin Jake had flashed during Christmas Eve. By the time I pulled into the long driveway leading to the farmhouse, adrenaline was coursing through me. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't leaving until they saw the truth with their own eyes. I walked into the house, the receipts clutched tightly in my hand, the cold from outside still biting at my coat. My mom was in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove, while my dad sat at the dining table, the newspaper held in his usual grip. Jake leaned against the counter, casually eating an apple, looking as smug as ever. They all turned to face me as I entered, but I didn't wait for any of them to speak. Instead, I strode to the table and dropped the stack of receipts in front of my dad. "There," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Every deposit I've made to the farm account since July. My name, the dates, the amounts, it's all right there." My dad frowned, setting down his newspaper as he picked up the receipts. He started flipping through them, his brows furrowing deeper with each page. My mom wandered over, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Jake stayed where he was, but I noticed his smirk falter, just for a second. This can't be right," my dad muttered, scanning the pages again. "Why would you do this, Susan?" My mom's lips thinned as she leaned in to see for herself. "Jake said he's been covering everything," she said, her tone laced with confusion and disbelief. I turned to Jake, locking eyes with him. "Well, Jake?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Are you still going to lie about it now?" Jake chuckled, tossing the apple core into the trash with a casual flick of his wrist. "Susan," he said smoothly, "I don't know where you got those, but they're not real. You probably forged them to make me look bad." His calm, mocking tone churned my stomach. I glanced at our parents, expecting, hoping, for a flicker of doubt, but all I saw was their disappointment aimed squarely at me. "Susan," my dad said, his voice low and angry, "what's gotten into you? This is a new low, even for you." My mom grabbed the stack of receipts, holding them like they were contaminated. "Did you think we wouldn't see through this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Jake's been here every day, working to keep this farm alive, and you," she jabbed the receipts toward me, "you come back with some phony papers and expect us to believe it? You've always been so desperate for attention." The tightness in my chest threatened to break me, but I fought to keep the tears at bay. "They're not fake," I said, my voice trembling with controlled anger. "You can call the bank yourself if you don't believe me." But they didn't even consider it. Instead, they stood united in their unwavering defense of Jake. My dad tossed the receipts back onto the table like they were trash. "Enough, Susan," he said, his tone final. I stared at them, stunned by their refusal to even entertain the truth. "I can't believe this," I said, my voice rising as the weight of their disbelief crushed me. "Even with the proof right here in black and white, you still defend him? I've spent months helping keep this farm afloat, and all you've done is give Jake the credit and call me a liar." Jake crossed his arms, leaning against the counter with that infuriating smirk. "Don't be so dramatic, Susan," he said with a shrug. "You've always been jealous. This isn't any different. That was the last straw." "You know what? I'm done," I said, my voice breaking with anger. "Don't expect me to ever come back here. I've had enough." My mom's face tightened, and my dad shook his head in disappointment, as if I were the one in the wrong. Without another word, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. The cold air hit me like a slap, but it was better than staying in that house another second. By the time I got back to Chicago, I'd made up my mind. No more bending over backward for people who refused to see the truth. The first thing I did after unpacking was call the bank. "No further transfers to that account," I told the teller, my voice steady, despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. It felt strange, like cutting a cord that had tied me to the farm for so long. But it also felt freeing, like I was finally letting go of a burden I never should have carried. At first, I thought I'd feel guilty. I didn't. Every time I thought about Jake's smug face or our parents' blind defense of him, my resolve only strengthened. Let Jake handle the farm. Let him be the hero he pretended to be. I wasn't going to keep throwing money into a place that treated me like an outsider. 6 months passed in silence. Not a phone call, not a letter, nothing. I focused on my work and tried to push the anger and hurt aside. Then, one summer afternoon, there was a knock on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I froze. Standing there were my mom and dad, looking tired and hesitant. My dad cleared his throat. "Can we come in?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. My mom clutched her purse tightly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Part of me wanted to slam the door in their faces. But curiosity won out. I stepped aside and let them in. They sat awkwardly on my couch, glancing around like they didn't know where to start. "What do you want?" I asked finally, leaning against the armrest of a chair with my arms crossed. Whatever they had to say, I wanted it out in the open. My dad stared at the floor, his voice low and hesitant. "Susan, we owe you an apology. A big one." My mom nodded, her grip on her purse so tight her knuckles were white. "We were wrong," she said softly. "We didn't believe you when you tried to tell us the truth. And, we need to make this right." I crossed my arms and leaned back in the chair. "Go on," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. My dad let out a heavy sigh. "After you left, things started falling apart on the farm, bills piled up, equipment broke down, and the crops didn't bring in enough to keep us going. At first, we thought Jake had it handled. He kept saying he'd figure it out, but he didn't, and when we pressed him, he trailed off." Glancing at my mom. Her eyes were brimming with tears as she picked up where he left off. "He confessed, Susan. He admitted it. You were the one making the deposits all those months. You were the reason we stayed afloat." She hesitated, her voice trembling. "We couldn't believe it, not just that he lied, but that we didn't listen to you when you tried to tell us. We're sorry, Susan, truly sorry, for not believing you, for how we treated you, for everything. You didn't deserve any of it." I stared at them. For the first time, I saw something in their faces I hadn't expected, genuine shame. My dad met my gaze, his expression heavy with regret. "We're asking for your forgiveness, Susan," he said quietly. "I know we don't deserve it, but we had to come here and tell you the truth. You saved the farm, and we owe you more than an apology." For a moment, I let their words hang in the air. Part of me wanted to let the silence stretch on forever, to make them sit with their guilt, but instead, I asked, "Where's Jake?" My voice was calm, but anger simmered just beneath the surface. My mom exchanged a nervous glance with my dad before answering. "He's still at the farm. He wanted to come with us, but we thought it was better if we spoke to you alone first." My dad nodded, shifting uncomfortably. He's been keeping to himself since he admitted everything. I think he knows there's no excuse for what he did. He's ashamed. "Ashamed?" I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. "That's rich. After months of letting you believe I was a liar? After taking credit for everything I did to keep the farm running?" My dad looked down, his face pale. "You're right," he said softly. "We let it go on far too long. That's on us as much as it is on him. But he wanted us to tell you that he's sorry. He knows he doesn't deserve forgiveness." "Oh, he wanted you to tell me?" I snapped, leaning forward. "Are you serious? You're still protecting him. Even now, he should be here, apologizing to my face. You should have forced him to come." My voice echoed through the small apartment, and I saw the shock on their faces, but I didn't care. I was done tiptoeing around their favoritism. My mom opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "Do you even hear yourselves? He lies, manipulates, and twists everything I did into some heroic story for himself. And now, when it's time to take responsibility, you're still shielding him? What? He's too embarrassed to face me, so you're here cleaning up his mess? Do you realize how insane that sounds?" My dad shifted uncomfortably, gripping his knees. "We thought this would be easier for everyone," he muttered. "Easier for who?" I shot back. "For Jake? For you? Because it sure as hell isn't easier for me." Neither of them had a response. My mom looked down at her hands, nervously twisting the strap of her purse, while my dad stared at the floor, his jaw tight. The silence between us stretched, heavy and suffocating, until finally, my dad stood. "You're right," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "We should have brought him. We should have made him face you. I don't know why we didn't. Maybe because we've been making excuses for him for so long. It's just what we do." My mom followed his lead, clutching her purse to her chest. She looked at me with watery eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're sorry, Susan. You deserved better from all of us." Without waiting for a response, they walked toward the door. My dad opened it, pausing for a moment to glance back at me, his face filled with regret. Then they were gone, the door clicking shut behind them. For a long time, I just sat there, the weight of their shame hanging in the room like a ghost. For the first time in my life, it felt like they finally saw the truth. A week later, there was another knock at my door. When I opened it, my stomach turned. Jake was standing there, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, looking as miserable as I'd ever seen him. "Susan," he said, his voice low and hesitant, "can I come in?" For a moment, I considered slamming the door in his face, but instead, I stepped aside, letting him in without a word. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He didn't sit or take off his jacket. Finally, he spoke. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "for everything, for lying, for taking credit for the money you sent, for letting Mom and Dad treat you the way they did." His voice cracked, but I stayed silent, waiting. "I don't have an excuse," he continued. "I was jealous of you, Susan. I've always been jealous. You've done so much with your life, and I stayed behind. I thought if I could keep their approval, I'd feel, I don't know, important, but it was wrong, all of it." Jake's voice broke completely, and before I could say anything, he dropped his head into his hands and started to cry, big, heavy sobs that shook his entire body. It wasn't the kind of crying you fake. It was raw, filled with shame. For a moment, I just stood there, unsure of what to say or do. After that day, something shifted. My parents didn't call right away, but when they did, their tone was different. No defensiveness, no excuses. My dad mentioned they'd started handling the farm finances themselves. My mom let it slip that Jake was working to make things right. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. As for Jake, he stayed out of my way after that apology. He didn't try to fix things too quickly, which was fine by me. Trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. But knowing my family finally saw the truth, and the hurt they'd caused, was enough to give me a little peace.